Good morning, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I see we're all trying to settle down. Thank you so much for making it to INB 8. On behalf of the Bureau, I'd like to welcome you to this 8th meeting of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body to draft, negotiate a WHO Convention Agreement or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. I'd like to acknowledge the Director General and the Executive Director. And Director General, I would like to give you an opportunity to address INB 8. And thereafter we'll get into our business, roll up our sleeves, because we've got a marathon to run. As we approach the finishing line, it is always difficult for those who run races. You probably know better, I don't, but those who run marathons, you know how difficult it is as you approach the finishing line. Ambassador.
I was saying to Pada, I will speak after the co-chairs because...
Yes, I'd also like to welcome our Bureau members who have been hard at work leading the subgroups. Since they were established, it's been a lot of work, and I want to take this opportunity to thank them as well as co-facilitators and the drafting group members who have had time to engage and participate in those subgroups. I would like to invite my co-chair to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Precious, and good morning, colleagues. It's very good to see you. I hope you say the same of us, and I hope that you also will keep on saying it in 2 weeks' time, because we're stuck for 2 weeks with each other, and I hope we keep up the good spirit to progress the work as good as we can. And I'm not going to say too much as a personal reflection, but let me make one reflection. I'm not sure if you all have a subscription for Netflix on your iPad or on your television, but if you do, I would invite you to check out the documentary they have on there on the building and the implementation of the James Webb Telescope. I think 30 years ago, and we don't have 30 years, we have only 2 years, but some people thought of the crazy idea of putting a telescope out in space, the James Webb Telescope. And there were, well, if you look at the documentary, there were about 325 crucial things that could go wrong, and then nothing would happen in the end. But everything worked, and the world community, the brightest minds came together and they made it work, and it was quite remarkable. And the good thing about the documentary, at least in my view, was that in the end, some of the scientists, they followed and they said, well, if we, as people from different countries, could come together and make this work, I think everything is possible. And, well, I don't want to go into the cheap allergies, but let's hope that we can build our own James Webb Telescope together. And I think our challenge is maybe not as huge as it was technically for them, but we have different challenges we have to bridge and to overcome. But I think if we, as people from everywhere, could build a James Webb Telescope, we can also produce a pandemic treaty. And I hope that the weeks that lie ahead of us will prove that, and that we will, well, fulfill that challenge together. And look forward to the coming weeks, and look forward on working with you. And let's keep each other sharp. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Perhaps just a reminder that 2 years ago, February 2022, we actually met in this room to kickstart this process. Exactly 2 years. So this is our second anniversary. And When we met 2 years ago, we were quite enthusiastic, full of energy, and Dr. Viroj spoke about the honeymoon. And I spoke about the difficulty that the Bureau has as marriage counselors to marry 194 people. But we're gonna get you to make this work. And difficult as it may be, we are going to make this work. We owe it to our populace. We owe it to those who need to be safe in future, and we also owe it to ourselves because we need a safer and fairer world. We probably are going to have to find ways in which we can reach consensus. And I had an opportunity to talk to Ambassador Ramadan, and I'd like to welcome him. He spoke about constructive ambiguity. And I would imagine that in some of the language that we're going to choose as we craft, we're going to consider that and look at the virtue of that and where it will matter most and how best we can address that. With those words, I'd like to invite the DG to address us. Thank you.
Thank you, my sister Precious and Roland. Dear co-chairs, dear vice chairs, members of the Bureau, and dear member states, starting from our EB members. First of all, I would like to start with a can-do, what do you call it, mentality. As you may know, our constitution was written in 6 months, the WHO constitution. Actually, the first time I heard about it was from Steve Solomon, who is here seated at the end of our table here. Of course, we have been negotiating on this. You have been negotiating on this from December 2021. That was when it was decided, for 2 years. And we have few months to go, or few weeks. I think it's clearly more than the 6 months. So it means it's doable, even with the remaining time that we have. When people ask me whether I am optimist or pessimist, I always tell them I prefer to be a realist and to see things as they are and what can be done and what cannot be done. I think this can be done when I see it realistically, to be honest. And that's what I believe. So if our constitution took only 6 months, this one I think we had enough time, and we have, I think, enough time, if there is political commitment, to have a deal and have the agreement by May 2024, so it will be endorsed in our assembly. So that's what I would like to start with. And then, of course, the past 2 years you have covered a lot of ground, a lot of things have been done. And I think recognizing the progress so far is very important, because I want us to have a positive outlook. And the reason, I'm just starting from this because there are some words I heard from you during the course of the negotiation, which I will say now because you know them all, but to just remind you, and these are collection of advices from member states that I heard over the period of the negotiation. So it's just from you back to you. And I started actually with the first one, which was, Tedros, I think we have covered a lot of ground, and there is reason for optimism. That's something that I heard from you, and acknowledging the achievement so far, because you have identified the challenges, and there are many of the issues, the focus areas identified, and even progress in finding some of the common grounds and consensus. I think there are many things that you can acknowledge as major progress, and that should give us positive outlook. No matter how incremental they were, I think it is progress. So I fully agree with those who said we need to recognize the progress so far. Then the other thing you keep saying from many is we should listen to each other. I think that's central, because from listening comes understanding the other side's perspective, and that's how you put it. You know, when we discuss about access or equity, when they come as solution, these are not theoretical issues. These are the challenges we have faced during the pandemic. And those communities affected by it can tell you more. Maybe the low and middle income countries, given the experience they have in access and equity, I think the listening part and understanding the challenges is really key. And I was very glad to hear from you again that the listening part, and especially understanding the views of those affected by many of the challenges we have faced during the pandemic, is important. And then the other principle, which I heard also from you coming very often, is emphasizing the greater good. Because we can find solutions in that. The virus is a common enemy, and the overarching goal is to prevent future pandemics, and that's a common interest. And there is a greater common good. And if we put that as one of the principles, then finding a solution to move into that greater good will not be difficult. So I'm glad to hear that very often. And the other issue which was really clear over the negotiation was, you know, instead of, I heard you say, instead of really competing on issues, we have to focus on constructive problem solving. Because whatever problem there is, we share the problems. They're common problems. It's about us. It's not about, you know, there is no two sides. There is one side. And if we approach it from a problem-solving angle, we can solve the problems we're facing, and then move into reaching a consensus to have the deal on time. Then when you have the problem-solving approach, I know the other the thing related to that I heard is it needs, it brings, flexibility and creativity. Because when you try to understand it as a problem, then you will definitely go into finding solutions, then that brings flexibility and creativity. But it starts from identifying, as you have said, identifying the problems as common problems. It's not the problem of the North, or it's not the problem of the South. It's our problem, a problem that affects all of us. When we approach it this way, and in our engagements also, one thing that you have said, you said you can address the trust deficit that we have. And I know some of you have recognized it, even during discussions, saying maybe some of the barriers or bottlenecks that are affecting us from making progress is the trust deficit. But if we try to understand it as a common problem and solve the problem, and there is flexibility and creativity on that, then trust could be built. And finally, if we do that, And as you always say, and many of you, then comes the win-win solution. This is not about competition, who competes with who, because this is about preparing the world to fight a common enemy. So the compromises and collaboration will be the way forward rather than competition. And this is what you have underlined. And as I said earlier, just to remind you, then, of course, when you compromise, you will need some rooms to maneuver. And maybe I will also remind you one thing from what you told me, and including recent discussions, by the way, with some member states during the Munich Security Conference. As negotiators, you may not have a big space. So some member states said, we engage our ministers of health, our foreign ministers, and also our heads of government and heads of state. Maybe Biyun is shaking because he was in one of these discussions. Because the involvement of the senior leaders, including heads of government and the ministers, means you can get more rooms for negotiation. And I think since we have now a few weeks left, I think the engagement of the highest level of leaders will be important to give you more space for compromise, because it's through compromise and collaboration that we can get into the finish line. So these are the things I heard from you, and if you apply them, I think it's possible. And given the progress you have made, I think reaching finish line by May 2024 is possible. And I'm really positive about that. And I have, of course, without undermining the challenges we are facing, there are. But what I'm basically saying is you can overcome them. They're not insurmountable, and it's possible to really do the finish. And in order to keep the momentum, I think finishing it by May 2024 will be very important. During the board meeting, by the way, many of you said we need to finish by May 2024. And I think this is because you believe it's possible to do it when there is an active understanding of each other's concern, and you focus the negotiation on identifying the problems as common problems and trying to solve them. Then final is on the misinformation and disinformation. As you know, there is active, what do you call it, movement going on, including some countries actually from members of parliament. I think it's from lack of understanding, some of it. And I'm really glad in the document to see the inclusion, the clarity, saying WHO or the Director General will not have the powers to cede sovereignty or whatever is flying around, which is really good. Because instead of saying in the document you will not find anything that cedes sovereignty to WHO, you can, in that one article, I think you have all read that in the document, it says this will not happen. I think this will build some confidence in those who have real concerns. Of course, some of the conspirators, maybe they have a different agenda and they may not even settle because of that, because they may have other issues. But I think for those who have no other agenda, I think the clarity of that text will help them to understand that whatever was being said about WHO, about ceding sovereignty or tampering freedom or ordering lockdowns, that people will understand that it's not true and it will not be true. So I'm glad that's the case, that's now in the document, and hopefully we'll address the misinformation, disinformation. But at the same time, I would also like to encourage member states, whatever opportunities you get, to say it. This is a negotiation between us, between countries, for countries, and will be implemented by countries based on your own national laws and other national factors. When you say it, that will also help that it's not true, because instead of saying no, we're not, but if you say that WHO Secretariat is not going to take what is being said, I think can help. But from our side, we will continue to do that. So again, thank you so much. I think we have the opportunity to finish, and I believe that it can be done to have the agreement on time, and for whatever support you need from me and from the Secretariat, from my team, we're at your disposal, and I wish you all the best during this very, very important week of the IMB. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director General. There is goodwill. There is goodwill because you have invested in this, you've invested your time. We've held 21 informal and subgroup meetings since September 2023. So it just shows the amount of effort that has gone into the work of INB. We've had 8 meetings and 3 resumed sessions. That's a total of 11. Now, if you add all of that, it's 21 plus 11, 32 sittings where we've been meeting. And this excludes any bilateral meetings and workshops that are held by different groupings. So it's a lot of investment in terms of time, and it's a sign of goodwill on your part that you'd like to see this work. And I'd like to thank you again, Director General, for reinforcing the messages about misinformation out there, and also appeal that we talk about this and explain that this is member states led. It is member states who are deciding about this agreement. And the more we explain in our countries, I think the better. It will help us deal with the misinformation. So I would like us now to proceed and adopt the agenda and the program of work. So let us consider agenda that is contained in document A/INB/8/1. So shall I take it that the meeting is prepared to adopt the agenda? So I see no request for the floor, so it is so decided. So the Bureau has consulted. We also had an opportunity to share the program of work with you in advance for this meeting, which is available in A/INB/8/2. I would like to highlight the following issues which were communicated to you when this program of work was shared, as well as the practical aspects that the Bureau has proposed. Firstly, that in the promotion of continued transparency and meaningful participation of relevant stakeholders, the INB has invited relevant stakeholders to nominate one delegate to be physically present in the meeting room for the plenary session, but also allow others to be present in the WHO building. I would like to express our appreciation of those who have been able to attend, and of course others are attending online, as well as those who are able to listen in. The second is about webcasts and public information. It presents an opportunity for the public to also listen to the proceedings. And as we discuss agenda item 1, the opening of the session and adoption and report of the meeting, closure of the session, would like these to be publicly webcast. And would like stakeholders to observe these discussions. As to agenda item 3, on the next steps in agenda 4, item 4, this is where we'll be discussing proposals for entities to be included under Annexure D and E, which is contained in document A/INB/7/4. And these will not be publicly webcast, and it will just be for the participation of INB members only, as well as associate members and regional economic integration organization. Discussion of item 2 on the agenda is the consideration of the negotiation of the WHO Convention, Agreement, and other instruments on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. So the proposal is based on progress that has been made from the subgroups, progress that has been made so far, and I think if we reflect a bit on what was decided in INB 7, it said that there will be refined textual proposals that will be tabled, and we will discuss this in 2 parts. And I would like to share with you the process that will follow during this sitting. The first part will be consideration in the plenary. INB will provide summary reports of the work of the INB, including the work that come out of subgroups in respect of those articles that have been discussed over this period. The floor will also be open for immediate reactions to the summary reports presented by the Bureau. It will be in the following order. We'll first allow member states and then relevant stakeholders. The speaking times will be for regional statements, it will be 4 minutes, national statements 3 minutes, and relevant stakeholders 2 minutes. Part 2 of the agenda will be consideration in the drafting group, including its subgroups, of what was previously agreed to by INB. That during the drafting group, this will be conducted in a closed session that is open to member states, associate members, and regional economic integration organizations as appropriate, and observer delegations of Palestine and the Holy See. The drafting group will be invited to consider the negotiating text based on progress made and the refined text that will be presented from the subgroups in line with the schedule outlined in the program of work. With respect to Agenda 3, which is the next steps, the drafting group will receive the summary reports from the subgroups, because during this sitting, subgroups will be meeting to work towards finalization of the work. They will report back again, and then we'll, on the basis of that, discuss the next steps. So with this description of our program of work, as contained in A/INB/8/2 with the revisions that were shared with delegates last Friday by email. Do you agree that we proceed in this way, or are there any objections? I see none. So the program of work is adopted. So we'll discuss the timetable. So firstly, in line with the practical aspects, the Bureau is proposing that the working hours will be from 9 to 12:30, and we'll break for lunch and come back again at 14 hours to 17 hours CET. We'll be using the traffic light system, and I would like to appeal that we keep to time. For those who don't keep to time, I will start singing if you don't stop. But I'm told if I sing beautifully, it will be an encouragement. Others will just continue. So I'll devise other means. I would like to remind you as delegates that you must deliver your speech at moderate speed that allows for interpretation so that your message is conveyed clearly and accurately. Delegates participating virtually are reminded that for them to be heard properly, they must have appropriate sound quality so that others can benefit from their intervention, and interpreters alike must be able to provide their services in interpreting their submissions online. So the minimum requirements are that you should have a USB connected unidirectional microphone, headphones, a strong and stable internet connection, and a quiet location. So please, sound quality is important. So if you do not provide good sound quality, it will not be possible for you to participate, and your input will be suspended, and it will be unfortunate because this is repeated. I think in every meeting you probably know that this is repeated. We say this over and over again, just like when you fly, the cabin crew tells you to fasten the seat belt. We are also repeating, please, sound quality, so that we can hear you. Would like to hear you, would like to also benefit from your interventions, and the interpreters also would like to provide proper support. So with this, would like to hear from you whether is it okay if we proceed in this manner, or are there any objections? I see no objection. We shall proceed accordingly. So, coordination with WGIHR. With respect to coordination with WGIHR, the bureaus continue to meet, and we have had informal sessions as well, but we've also agreed to have a formal sitting during this INB on the 23rd of February, where the two groups will sit together with member states so that we can become granular, particularly with those areas of overlap, and ensure that we can have a proper pathway on how we proceed. So distribution of texts of the drafting group to relevant stakeholders. As you heard during the briefing, as co-chairs, as we're briefing you, the report of the 7th meeting of the INB agreed that texts emanating from the various processes will be shared with the drafting group. However, at this briefing last week, we had several relevant stakeholders requesting that the current text should be shared. And precisely because they also want to make interventions based on text that they've read. So if INB agree that all text be shared, we'd like to get that confirmation so that the text should be shared. I see no objection, so, oh, Ethiopia?
Sorry for interrupting. Is that includes all articles or the sharing of documents? Just a clarity.
You want to respond? Yes, Secretary?
Thank you and good morning. To respond to Ethiopia's question, indeed it would be all the articles that were shared with the drafting group members to also be shared with relevant stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning all. Just because of the procedure, I didn't salute you well. Thank you.
Okay, are you happy, Ethiopia? Okay. So it seems it was a matter of clarity, so there is no objection. In that regard, we will share with the relevant stakeholders. Thank you. I will then hand over to Co-Chair Roland to proceed with agenda item 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Precious. We shall indeed now move on to agenda item 2 of our agenda, and that's the consideration and negotiation of the WHO Convention, agreement or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. And we will consider all the proposals for the negotiation text of the WHO pandemic agreement based on progress made. Those are the articles and the information we just discussed with the Ethiopian colleagues, all the information that was recently shared with you, showing the progress and showing the state of play where we are with each of the different articles. And like we communicated with you and discussed with you, is that we arrived at where we are through different means, sometimes through subgroups, sometimes in other means, and we will all dig into that, and when we get there we will explain to you exactly how we arrived on where we stand. And I think it's important to repeat that where we stand is not the position of the Bureau, it just represents the progress made. We show the progress made, and it's up to you during these days to discuss with us whether or not you all feel that we are on the right track. So we start with this plenary session this morning, and I presume that it will take up most of our morning session today. We will provide updates on the various articles of the text, including the work of the subgroups, and like I said, we will later on, when we dig into those articles themselves, we will explain a bit more on where we stand, but we will start this morning with a more general update. And we will begin with the reports of the subgroups, and I will invite the ambassadors and other vice chairs in a moment to do that. And later on, we will open up for a more general debate, so to say, giving you and giving our NGO colleagues the chance to speak out about their expectations or, well, whatever you want to say before we really dig into our 2-week marathon session. We hope you will spare your inputs on the articles for a bit later when we really dig into those, but if you want to have preliminary or introductory remarks you want to make before we really start, that will be the moment. But like I said, we will give the vice chairs first a chance to briefly update you on where we stand with the subgroups. And as you know, those subgroups, they contain the most, well, difficult articles, so to say, the real substance matter at hand that we really think are the core of our work. And that's why we put them in subgroups, and that's why you all, with the vice chairs, put so much effort in to try to get to an agreement on those articles. We will begin with Ambassador Honsei Kozo of Japan, Vice Chair leading on the Articles 4, 5 and 6, and he is supported by India, Tanzania, and UK as co-facilitators, and he will provide a summary report on where we stand. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair. First of all, I'd like to appreciate my subgroup co-facilitators for their great contribution to prepare a revised proposal text. A focus of our subgroup for Article 4, 5, and 6 was addressing the significant divergence we observed in the submitted proposals from the proponents and refining the text for greater agreement among proponents before INB 8 from today. We made significant progress in the proposed text of discussion with the proponents. I appreciate a lot proponents' active participation in our informal discussion. We heard from the group that we cannot ignore that future public health risks with pandemic potential. It is essential to identify risks to pathogens with pandemic potential, prevent their spread, and ensure the pandemic preparedness, readiness, and responses, so-called PPR. We confirmed no one is safe from public health threats until everyone is safe. We recognize the importance of coherence between the IHR under discussion and the WHO pandemic agreement to ensure robust, resilient, and flexible capacities and mechanisms in state parties and solidarity in global cooperation for pandemic prevention, preparedness, readiness, and their response. We also heard from proponents that provisions must be concrete and precise so that the obligation of state parties to implement the instrument are clear. On the other hand, we also heard that the negotiation process must consider the provisions of flexibility and adaptability to account for state parties' different capacities, challenges, and circumstances. We also heard it is essential to consider the provisions of flexibility to state parties to introduce new technologies and science and evidence-based systematic approaches, especially at the human, animal, plant, and environmental interfaces, and how the partners support strengthening state parties' capacities for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and readiness and response. With the discussion with the proponents, co-facilitators, and I came up with 4 criteria to refine the proposed text. First, we reduced duplication and repetition. For example, what is included in the SHAPO is not repeated in the following paragraphs or subparagraphs. However, when some words appear repeatedly, we do so intentionally, especially about providing financial technical support for all 3 articles. Second, we made the structure more logical. Third, we avoided lengthening text so that each paragraph has one idea. Last but not least, we used standardized language in IHR, such as develop, strengthen, and maintain. In the next couple of weeks in INB 8, co-facilitators and I hope to discuss which element we agree on how constructively of all us can contribute to discussing the matters for greater agreement. We are also expected to welcome you to the session with Bureau WGIHR and INB this Friday. We hope to discuss consistency and coherence in both instruments, including Article 4, 5, and 6. I'm looking forward to meaningful discussion with you in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kozo. Next, I will invite Ambassador Amar Ramadan of Egypt, and he was leading on the Articles 10, 11, and later on 13 as well, with the support of the Philippines, Indonesia, and the USA as co-facilitators. And please, update us.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Good morning, everybody. Following IMB 7 in December, the co-facilitator, the three co-facilitators Roland just referred to, has met most of you in consultation trying to find out what language can be agreeable in the text regarding these 2 or 3 articles. And that process resulted in a text that we have submitted to you and was subject for discussion during the intersessional on the 1st of February. We listened carefully to your comments on the 1st of February. I know that for Article 13, it was probably first time presented in that sense, and some delegation required further time, which is fine. 10 has probably got more time for discussion than 11. So with the preliminary remarks we got from you on the 1st of February, we were able to slightly edit the text to present to you next Wednesday. And that's the one that was circulated to you last week. What is that text? That text is what me and the co-facilitator deem is a workable text or a potential text for agreement. It's by no way a consensual text. I know most of you have issues with certain paragraphs here and there. Even the group that I'm coming from, and even the Egyptian delegation has some comments to make also on that. But this is, as a chair of that subgroup and a member of the Bureau, I think that that text can provide a good basis for further tightening during the negotiation. So on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, I hope that we will receive comments, not textual amendments, but comments from you. Why do you like that and why you don't like that in the text? And we will, again, me and the co-facilitators will take very careful note of what you have to say and try probably to, again, edit the text for future discussion. It is very important to realize that we are not going to go backwards. We are not going to go to the previous text, but we want to look ahead. So I would ask all delegations to be accommodative as much as possible, and as the DG mentioned in his opening remarks today, that we need to be realistic in what can be achievable in such an agreement. We know the different positions. We are not coming from the same departure point, but at least I think we can converge on a certain point. So if there is anything to be blamed, please blame me, but I'm ready to work with you, and I try to meet most of you also in different groups this week and next week in trying to understand better where we can make changes to the text and move forward. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Firosh of Thailand, who is leading on Article 12 with the support of Australia, Ethiopia, and Norway as co-facilitators to provide his summary report.
Thank you, Roland. I'd like to highlight the following: the 3 major impacts of COVID pandemic. First impact is case and death tolls. I would remind you, the total COVID case is 700 million. Confirmed death, 7 million. However, WHO estimate total excess death attributable to the pandemic situation is 15 million, not 7 million confirmed deaths. And the economists estimate 28 million. So these are the impact. Second impact is the government fiscal response to COVID. The global fiscal response through additional spending by government of foregone revenue from the pandemic since January 2020 from World Bank and confirmed with IMF is 10 trillion US dollar, of which 1.45 trillion, 14% was health sector response. So these were the stake, the foregone, the economic, the fiscal response by government. And finally, the economic impact, the wider impact of the economy. High-income country has responded significantly of their GDP to pandemic. Now I'd like to update the progress of Article 12. Numerous informal and formal subgroup meetings were convened prior to INB 8. Discussion was on the design element of PAPS. And finally, last week we discussed the flow chart, the interlink, the relationship between access and benefit sharing. These are the general agreement. First, we need a PAPS by May. No one say we do not want PAPS by May, unless I misunderstood. We understand more the ecosystem, the complexity of GSD and DSI sharing through electronic. And we recognize the increasing importance of GSD in the development of the future pandemic response products, and confirm that GSD is part of the PAPS system in addition to biological material for which PIP framework did not cover. We agree that benefit sharing will include monetary and non-monetary contribution and the sources of contributions. The remaining issue is the size of the monetary contributions and the use for what? For PPPR capacity building, capacity strengthening, or maintenance of the lab system and GSD database system. In final, a few sticky issues were identified. I see there is a good move toward a solution rather than complaint on the problems and try to explain what and how we cannot do. But we have to go how and what we can do. Together, I think we can overcome this sticky issue. A few sticky issues that can be resolved if the INB 8 has intention to go ahead. This interlinked with Article 1920 that Ambassador Tova has kindly chaired the subgroup. Bear in mind that the death toll, the economic toll, is much more than a good enough PAP system to prevent another pandemic.
Thank you very much, Firoz. Next, and as the last Vice Chair leading a subgroup process, I invite Ambassador Tova da Silva Nunes of Brazil, who's been leading on the Articles 19 and 20 with the support of Canada, Malaysia, and South Africa as co-facilitators, to provide his update.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Allow me to greet warmly the Director General and all distinguished delegates and participants to our meeting. I was greatly helped by the co-facilitators, and I must say that without them we would not have reached the proposal that we have put forward for your consideration. So thank you, Canada, Malaysia, and South Africa. And our intent was to first hold dialogue through interactive sessions, intersessional informals that we held, but also briefings with experts. These briefings involve the participation of the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, to understand how the Rio 92 conventions have been financed and how the governance that they have provided. We were benefited also from the inputs from discussions held outside our WHO instance. It was one event, very important, held at the Graduate Institute that was organized by Canada and Ghana. And we have also benefited from the inputs from Gavi, the Pandemic Fund, the Global Fund, and also the Contingency Emergency Fund here at the WHO through Laila Milad and Scott Pendergast. Well, all of this interaction had one sense, how to deal with the challenge we have ahead of us. The first challenge is obviously how to provide one solution for both the IHR and the pandemic prevention, preparedness and response obligations that we're trying to negotiate here at the INB. That is a huge challenge because, as you know, we have not been able so far to clearly establish the vision of labor or synergy that we know exists between our two exercises. I was greatly helped by the very constructive role played by Colin McCliff from the United States and all the members of the WGIHR Bureau. And we have been discussing with the WGIHR how best to proceed in light of this challenge and attribution that we took on board to both see how best we can provide support for health emergencies, but also PPPR. Now, as we discussed and proposed language for Article 19, we realized that there is behind the need to increase security, to have obligations for increased security, we need to provide support for that increased security. Not only the landscape of countries is very asymmetrical. You have countries that have more capacity to provide development of core capacities and prevent, prepare, and better respond to pandemics, and others that are not. And that is not only a question of income. It's not by dividing a country's income by their population that you will have an index of preparedness for this task. It's much more complicated than that. One could actually claim vulnerability. You have countries that are, for example, small island states, developing or not, and they are very much vulnerable, so they need also increased support. And developing countries clearly need more support, both in technical assistance and know-how and financing than other countries. So the challenge is how to provide obligations that are common to all countries, but then would have the benefit of allowing other countries to have more support than others. And how do you assess that? How do you establish that those needs and gaps? So this is a huge challenge that we want. And the target that we proposed was to have sustainable finance. That means we have been confronted, and then through the experts' inputs, we realize how fragmented the current financing landscape is. But there is a landscape. That is a good news. There is solidarity. There is an impulse from donor countries. So this is of an immense value. We have to preserve that and use that for our concerns on health emergencies and PPPR. That should be, by all means, maintained in a way that is channeled to what I call the sustainable finance. Sustainable because we need predictable sources of finance. We need also the governance to be very inclusive and transparent and accountable and efficient, so and equitable and fair. So all of these elements for the finance and the support for countries in general, all countries, but especially developing countries, through this sustainable finance has to come through our language as we go forward with commitments. Now, with the excessive fragmentation, how is it possible to coordinate this landscape in order to liberate or channel the resources? We think that it's possible. After all of the discussions we held, there is a role for whatever mechanism we create under WHO, and with the full authority and sovereignty of member states to better coordinate the existing financing landscape. As we also liberate and assemble and channel new resources if necessary, and of whatever nature. We're trying to avoid mandatory contributions, and we're leaving in our proposal, we're leaving for the member states in the future a role to establish strategic targets, and then allow the need for financing to come from these strategic targets, but this will be owned by member states and in full coordination with existing sources. So this is what we have proposed, and that's what you have in front of you. We're willing and looking forward to discuss further with member states how best to shape and polish these proposals, and also in synergy with the WGIHR. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thanks to all the IMB Vice Chairs who've been doing a remarkable job in bringing these difficult discussions forward, together with you all, of course, and especially in cooperation with the co-facilitators. And I'd like to thank them again for their hard work, because their role is very, very important. I will now continue with a short update on the other articles, the remaining articles, so to say, on which we have also been working in different ways, like I already explained in the beginning of our sessions. These were not assigned to the subgroups, but they were brought forward by either volunteer countries, as we call them. Those are just colleagues from amongst yourselves who said, we want to step up with some other colleagues and see if we can capture the spirit of the negotiations and develop the articles at hand a bit further, and see if that is beneficial to all other colleagues. Or it's been done by ourselves with the help of the Secretariat, and we call them the orphan articles, the articles that we all felt, well, they will come, but we will deal with them later. And we thought, well, it's also important that we capture the progress and the spirit of everything you said during the first reading of those articles. So like I said, we try to progress and further develop the different articles, not in the subgroups, in different ways. So with respect to Chapter 1, and then especially the Articles 1, 2, and 3, those have been developed or progressed by the Bureau ourselves. We have been building on discussions at IMB 7 and various textual proposals that you have provided us along the way. When we look at Chapter 2, especially the Articles 7 and 8, and 16, 17, and 18, we have also further elaborated them by ourselves with help of the Secretariat, like I said, on the same basis. So based on the input you provided us orally during our discussions in the first reading, or in writing afterwards. Then, with respect to Chapter 2, the Article 9, that specific article has been further developed by the volunteer delegations of Mexico and Norway, and they've reached out to some of you to see if they were on the right track, and we will also dig into that article later on this week. Fourthly, on Chapter 2, the Article 14, that specific article has been further developed by the volunteer delegation of the USA, and I understand that the USA will also provide update text for Article 15 during the course of our work this week as well. Fifthly, Chapter 3. That one contains textual proposals as proposed by IMB Bureau with respect to Article 21, and as proposed by volunteer delegations of Colombia and Singapore regarding the other articles of that Chapter 3. And we will be inviting the volunteer delegations of Singapore and Colombia later on when we dig into those articles to provide us a little bit of a clarification on how they arrived on where we are today. So, with that, I think we've come to the stage where we open the floor for any immediate reactions to the summary reports that have been provided. So, if you have anything to react upon this morning before we start our discussions later on this week, this is the moment. And the first one on my list is Mexico with the regional statements on behalf of the the America regions. Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. I have the honor of making this statement on behalf of the member states in the Americas region. I will now change to English because that is the language in which we agreed on the translation.
The Americas region reiterates its commitment to the INB and the WGIHR processes. As we approach the final months of negotiations, we reaffirm our willingness to continue working constructively to deliver, by the agreed deadline of May 2024, an ambitious pandemic agreement and a fit-for-purpose revised IHR, mindful of the need to ensure complementarity and coherence between both instruments. The member states of the Americas region emphasize that equity should serve as a guiding principle and objective to be achieved through concrete commitments by member states at both the INB and the WGIHR. We highlight the importance of including provisions in the pandemic agreement to promote timely and equitable access to health products, including through more geographically diverse production capacities, effective prevention and surveillance capacities, resilient health systems, and the fair, equitable, and timely sharing of pathogens and benefits through a multilateral system. We look forward to continued exploration of these policy options and their modalities as we work towards a fit-for-purpose outcome. While recognizing that there are still different and sometimes opposing positions on some key issues, we remain ready to engage in productive discussions at the INB and the WGIHR meetings to achieve consensus. Our region is a strong believer in the power of dialogue and cooperation to overcome hurdles and bridge differences. Although we are a diverse region with countries with distinct levels of development, sizes, and national contexts, we recall that the Americas have a history of over a century of cooperation in the field of public health with the establishment of the Pan American Health Organization in 1902. The successful conclusion of both processes will demonstrate that multilateralism can still work effectively and generate collective solutions so that a tragedy like the one we witnessed during COVID-19 pandemic will not be repeated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Egypt on behalf of the Equity Group, to be followed by Ethiopia. Egypt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The Arab Republic of Egypt has the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Group for Equity. Firstly, we thank the Bureau for preparing a refined textual proposal of the negotiation text and briefing held last week on the modalities. The Group reaffirms its commitment to deliver an instrument with equity at its center. Since the first meeting of the WGPR in mid-July 2021, we have been persistent in the quest for action and deliverables towards an effective approach to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. We can only attain a more equitable public health response through collective effort and overriding commercial interests, putting lives before profits. Hence, let us all continue our work to craft a legal treaty and put aside our differences to achieve the goal of health for all. To fully implement the legally binding responsibilities envisaged in this instrument, many countries, developing countries in particular, would require additional resources. This is why there is a dire need to mobilize more resources in the spirit of international cooperation and solidarity. It would be unjust to burden the countries with such additional responsibilities when most of them haven't been capable to fully vaccinate their people against the COVID-19 pandemic. A pandemic that could cost millions of lives, such as the last one we witnessed, cannot be subjected to unpredictable financing and weak commitments to equity-related provisions. For us, the 29 member states comprising the Group for Equity research and development of pandemic-related products and the diversification of their production facilities, PABs, and access to technology and know-how are all important elements that would better operationalize the concept of equity. In view of the above, we urge for the following. First, we need an ABS system at the core of this instrument. Only through an ABS is how we can level the playing field between developed and developing countries and ensure a more equitable health response. Second, transfer of technology and know-how as well as support for local and regional manufacturing of pandemic-related products is key. Third, sustainable financing of the instrument, which takes into account the different levels of development of member states. Fourth, on governance, we need to establish a clear, transparent, and accountable governance system that ensures the smooth engagement of relevant entities and various mechanisms established under this instrument. We hope that these concepts could be refined, clarified, and agreed provisionally during this INB. This would make our lives easier when negotiating the text during the next INB meeting. In addition to the above, we suggest that the Secretariat is to kindly provide a glossary of terms and develop the records of the process since of the meeting of the special session of the WHA in November 2021 as a means to reflect and constitute the travaux préparatoires of this instrument and to allow for the better interpretation in the future of the different provisions we are negotiating. Finally, Chair, we would like to reiterate and underline the need to finalize a sound instrument by May 2024 and for all of us to make use of the remaining available time effectively to attain our collective goal. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next is Ethiopia on behalf of the Africa Group, to be followed by Bangladesh.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Ethiopia is honored to deliver the statement on behalf of the 47 member states of the African region and the Arab Republic of Egypt. We thank the Bureau, Vice Chairs and co-facilitators for their efforts to bring us closer to consensus. Given the limited time to conclude the negotiations and meet the May 2024 deadline, we take this opportunity to reiterate our full commitment to this process as we continue to negotiate in good faith. We appreciate the progress made, including during the informal consultations, which were led by the Vice Chairs and co-facilitators. We, however, note with great concern that Article 12 on pathogen access and benefit sharing, that will translate the provisions into meaningful impact at all levels, including the community, lags behind, and there is no agreed legal text yet. We see this article and its linkages to the other articles as the backbone of the whole instrument, and further request that sufficient time is allocated and that progress through text is achieved in this article. With regard to the proposed program of work, we suggest completion of text and immediate commencement of negotiations. The 47 member states of the African region and Egypt would like to reiterate our position that for equity to remain as a principle, indicator, and outcome of the instrument, there is need to concrete and tangible proposals and future-proofing of our health systems. In this view, an established funding mechanism should support the critical aspects on preparedness, adequate and capacitated multidisciplinary health and care workforce, and overall health system infrastructure support. We're of the strong view that sustainable and diversified local production, coupled with transfer of technology and know-how, are critical to ensuring equitable and timely access to health products and tools in the event of a pandemic. In our view, these 2 weeks are supposed to yield great progress on the pandemic agreement, and in particular on chapters 2 and 3, those including governance. As such, we propose that there be time to review progress at the end of the first week or on Monday of the second week. By doing this, the INB will be able to direct its efforts where it's most required, redeeming the time. This work may include bringing the discussions of text back in the INB drafting group if there is no progress in subgroups. As described earlier, we urge the drafting group to commence the negotiations and make progress before INB 9, and this be reflected in the program of work. It's in this spirit that the 47 member states of the African region and Egypt are committed more than ever to capitalize on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and work with all member states for the realization of a fair, just, and equitable world where the lives of people in all countries, regardless of where they live, are protected during health emergencies and pandemics. Co-chairs, Excellencies and colleagues, it's time to redouble our efforts and ensure our public confidence. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Bangladesh, to be followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. Bangladesh aligns itself with the statements of Equity Group and Africa Group, as well as with the statement to be delivered by India on behalf of Southeast Asia. Based on the experience during the COVID-19 pandemic, a new instrument for pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response was conceived. At its conception, the aim was to fill out the gaps in the health systems across the continents. Hence, we all agreed in EB 150.3 to put equity at the center of the new instrument. In that pursuit, Bangladesh will remain constructive. We have traveled quite a long way to come to this stage since the conception of the treaty. We hope to close the gaps amongst us and craft a treaty to reduce health inequities among the societies. In going forward, the spirit of international solidarity and inclusivity would be exigent. Bangladesh believes that the states parties should have a horizontal approach to strengthen health systems of the countries for pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response. Hence, we suggest to advance all articles on an equal footing. In view of the above, we suggest the following. First, to put public health at the center of the treaty. Second, to keep aside North-South polarity-based considerations. Third, to deliver on equity, to build around predictable financing, diversification of production of vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, etc., and leadership of WHO in its relations with other institutions. Fourth, to develop a PABS system applicable for both pandemic and non-pandemic situation. Fifth, to clearly outline the role of developed countries with requisite qualifier throughout the entire treaty to operationalize equity. And finally, to link up existing WHO's processes with the fundamental concepts of the treaty to reduce administrative and financial overhead and thus to ascertain participation of all WHO states parties. If we sincerely believe that the conception of the pandemic treaty was expedient, we have to craft solutions to the problems experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. This can direct us towards concluding an action-oriented treaty within the timeline. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next is the European Union, to be followed by India.
First, a huge thank you to the Bureau and co-chairs, and of course the vice-chairs and the co-facilitators of the many subgroups for their hard and tireless work to move the process forward. And also thank you to those stakeholders and non-governmental representatives who have enriched our discussions and contributed to the process so far. We value your input at all times. We will continue to work with all member states pragmatically, in good faith, towards a successful outcome by way of the adoption of a meaningful and balanced pandemic agreement in May. Such a successful agreement has to be meaningful by way of actually improving the state of prevention, preparedness and response, and by making a concrete difference on the ground, and it has to be balanced by way of addressing the full PPR cycle. In our view, this requires a concrete, comprehensive and meaningful set of provisions, also in the area of prevention, preparedness and One Health, to make the world a safer place for all of us. There's an important equity dimension to prevention, preparedness and One Health, as those who will be worst hit by a future pandemic arguably are the most vulnerable countries and populations. So to protect in particular the most vulnerable, we need to ensure that we do our utmost to prevent future pandemics from happening. We still have many crucial areas to work through, and we also, together, have to deal with the additional challenge of misinformation and disinformation related to this process. As an example, last week the EU was subject to an attempt at spreading misinformation about our position in the negotiations. We trust that we can all work together to combat and mitigate any attempts at spreading false information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is India, to be followed by Zambia.
Thank you, Chair. India has the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Southeast Asia Region Group. Dear colleagues, as we gather here today to negotiate the pandemic treaty, the specter of loss of around 7 million precious lives, along with trillions of dollars of loss which our economies collectively suffered during the COVID-19 pandemic, is still fresh in our memories. The defining global health crisis of our time and the greatest challenge we face since World War II has persuaded us to discuss, deliberate, and delineate a course of action which would strengthen our collective response to any pandemic in future. Today, as we huddle to identify how we could forge a treaty or an accord, we must not forget that the centrality of principles of equity would be vital to strengthen our pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, while addressing inequities and paving a way for everyone to enjoy the right to health. Additionally, as we, the member states, are striving to present the pandemic treaty at the forthcoming World Health Assembly, we must be persistent in our quest of action and deliverables in our future approach to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Towards that journey, only our togetherness can help us to override the confines of national and commercial interest. The COVID-19 pandemic is probably behind us, but the cause that brought us all together still exists. Hence, let us all craft a legal treaty, not for political mileage, but for human health exigencies. We applaud the INB for the work done so far. The draft in its current state indeed addresses some of the concerns of the member states. However, there are still many lacuna which need to be looked into and which we hope will be able to address as we move forward. As the basic underlying principle for further negotiations on the pandemic treaty, we again reiterate that equity should be core of our discussions. We should bear in mind that increasing obligations for developing countries, some of which are still struggling to deliver basic health care through their peoples, would be something which none of us would want. Secondly, WHO's centrality to the overall pandemic treaty must be preserved, including in aspects where coordination with other international or multilateral organizations would be required for better implementation, monitoring, and accountability purposes. This also calls for strengthening of WHO for efficient implementation of the pandemic treaty. Thirdly, there should be clear-cut accountability with regards to the implementation of the treaty. To achieve equity within the framework of pandemic treaty, it is vital that the role of developed countries be clearly enunciated. Fourthly, as we talk about collective obligations and responsibilities, references to any non-negotiated standards and guidelines would only be counterintuitive. We also put forward certain suggestions before the chair on procedural aspects as well, most important of which is to set up a committee to record the negotiating history as per Vienna Convention of the Laws. Excellency, the INB has indeed taken steps to forge consensus on principles of equity, solidarity, common but differentiated responsibilities, and transparency. We now hope to translate these concepts into actionable and accountable provisions within the text. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Zambia, to be followed by China.
Thank you, co-chairs, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Zambia aligns this statement to that made by Ethiopia on behalf of the Africa region and Egypt. We wish to start by commending the co-chairs and the entire Bureau for leading this process, the Secretariat for their support, and all parties and stakeholders for their hard work. Co-chair, we are very close, yet so far from the finish line. There is still a lot of work to be done. At this time, we cannot afford to shift our focus from the triggers of this process, but should continue to work towards establishing for ourselves and future generations a pandemic accord that establishes equity as a guiding principle. Co-chair, different states parties continue to work to put forward different viewpoints on what they perceive as the key in the pandemic accord. For us as Zambia, not closing the gaps identified before and during the COVID-19 pandemic means constant uncertainty as to how our country and many others like ours will prevent, prepare, and respond to any future pandemic or threats. This is reflected in the manner in which we continue to respond to outbreaks that our countries are riddled with almost on a daily basis. I dare say, Co-Chair, that if the world settles for the status quo by the failure to give and take, including considerations for issues encompassed by such principles as common but differentiated responsibilities, issues such as the sound and clear financing mechanism and technology transfer, among others, as well as other key issues that, in our view, could serve to actualize equity, the possibility of our countries being the source of a future pandemic remain real. Lastly, we are confident in the process that we have embarked on collectively and look forward to its completion by May. I thank you, Chairs.
Thank you very much. Next is China, to be followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair. China wishes to thank the Bureau and the Secretariat of the IMB for the Pandemic Treaty for their active effort in promoting the negotiation process, in particular the Vice Chairs and the relevant countries for their leadership in organizing subgroup discussions on the key texts and putting forward draft proposals. China supports the statement made by the representative of Egypt and will continue to support the work of the Bureau and work together towards the goal of completing the negotiations before the WHA this year in May. Firstly, China appreciates the addition of the phrase common but differentiated responsibility to the new text, and we hope that the design of the specific mechanisms and institutional arrangements will effectively favor developing countries. The articles of the current text can continue to reflect this principle. And secondly, China supports the establishment of a unified multilateral system for PAPs. And this system should be operated in a transparent, fair, and equitable manner under the leadership of member states on the basis of respecting the sovereignty and ownership of member states over biological resources and materials. And we hope that the relevant PAPs system will provide sufficient benefits to pathogen-sharing countries so as to encourage member states to improve their domestic regimes and promote the active sharing of the relevant data. And thirdly, we support the existing discussion modality of the conference, that is, based on the consensus of the member states, to promote the further consideration of the text to avoid duplication and to strengthen the communication and coordination of the key provisions to accelerate the negotiation process. Fourthly, we hope to further strengthen the coordination with the WGIHR so as to improve the division of work and the allocation of articles to promote the two mechanisms to complement each other. And fifthly, we hope that the Bureau will actively coordinate and adhere to the multilingual working mechanism so as to help experts in the relevant fields in the capitals overcome time differences in attending the meetings, and at the same time, they can cross the language communication barrier to participate jointly in the formulation of the treaty. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Russian Federation, to be followed by Eswatini.
Distinguished co-chairs, distinguished colleagues, at the outset, we'd like to thank the Bureau and the chairs of the sub-working groups for the work done in the intersessional period. We welcome some progress made on the text of the draft. In line with the DG's view concerning the possibility of finishing the work on the document before May 2024. However, for this, as Dr. Tedros rightly mentioned, it is necessary to focus on what is the priority, namely the general threat and the provisions that are needed to reflect this threat in future. Reacting to public health emergencies means a comprehensive system. It's unlikely that we can manage to settle all the issues with one document. Too many measures can serve as a barrier to achieving consensus. Since there are many different regional and national contexts, we must focus on ensuring that we know what to do, but we must avoid imposing models as to how to do it. The document we are discussing must serve as the basis and the general framework for cooperation and a joint resolution of the problem. It must contain joint obligations. Additional aspects of the system may then be developed in the protocols to the convention. It's unlikely that we can agree on everything in the time remaining. We repeat, the agreement must be universal and not only accepted and adopted by a group of countries. A similar successful experience has already been encountered in WHO. The Tobacco Convention was adopted in this manner. During the negotiations on the convention, countries agreed to develop the first protocol to this convention, which was later also developed and implemented. At the same time, we must remember that we must base our text proposals on equity, equal approach to approaches to various agreements, consensus, culture, and public order in countries. We must avoid duplicating already existing regulations. We must also remember about the concerns of countries regarding sovereignty, since it is important to ensure security and safety. We are convinced that abiding by these principles and remembering our main problematic areas will mean that we will be successful in concluding our work on this text. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Eswatini, to be followed by Mozambique.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Eswatini aligns itself with the statement made by Africa Group and Egypt, and we appreciate the work put in by the co-chairs, vice-chairs, and co-facilitators to bring us closer to meeting the ambitious target of completing the negotiations by May 2024. Eswatini understands the importance of having an instrument that will address issues of pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response, whilst ensuring that it encompasses equity, transparency, trust, international cooperation, and solidarity. As we have been actively engaging Co-Chair throughout the intersessional period, it is worth highlighting that an instrument lacking on access and benefit sharing system with clear technology transfer benefits that leads to diversification of production to different regions will leave the several developing countries at a disadvantage. Further, this will mean that we have failed in addressing the issues that brought us to undertaking this mission of producing a legally binding instrument in the first place. It is imperative that we build a strong ABS system applicable to both the Pandemic Accord and the IHR of 2005. Such a system, in our view, will enable us to level the playing field. Response to pandemics means ensuring that we have diversified areas of manufacturing that will enable quick and effective response to outbreaks. The key to ensuring this is in the transfer of technology for local manufacturing to support production of health products, as history has shown us that we cannot rely on a few manufacturers, especially in times of pandemics. Instead, there is a need to empower those who have the capacity for effective PPR. In this regard, we believe in an accountable mechanism like technology access pool and a coordinated system of production facilities across regions needs to be established under the Pandemic Accord we are negotiating. Another critical aspect for the successful implementation of the obligations within the Accord is a financing mechanism which will be accountable to a governing body, taking into account the different levels of development with more support directed to developing countries. The financing mechanism should have a fund with more predictable sources of funding than what is currently reflected in the subgroup proposal. Also, converting this fund to a supplementary instrument would imply external funding agencies will determine the trajectory and progress of implementation of the Pandemic Accord. As I end, Chair, time is of the essence, and As we draw closer to the May deadline, we urge every one of us not to compromise on the content of this instrument. May it be our goal to ensure that we produce an instrument that will have equity at the center, an instrument that will take into account the aspect of common but differentiated responsibilities, an instrument that will ensure we are equipped with technology and know how to effectively deal with pandemics in the future, and lastly, an instrument that is a win-win for all. And to borrow from the DG's statement, this is the generational responsibility that we have, and failure is not an option. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next is Mozambique, to be followed by Iran.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Mozambique aligns itself with the statement delivered by Ethiopia on the behalf of the 47 member states of the African region. And we would like to take this opportunity to salute the DG, the Secretariat, the co-chairs, and the co-facilitators for your tireless commitment and the remarkable advance reached so far to ensure the delivering at the 77th Health Assembly a commonly agreed WHO pandemic accord ensuring equity in its essence. Throughout the last decades, the world has been confronted with increasing outbreaks of fakes. Between 2022 and 2023, African region alone registered more than 160 health events, the majority preventable with routine immunization. However, Africa produced only 1% of the vaccines needed to have a healthier population. As such, we expect WHO pandemic accord will guarantee solidarity, technical and financial support to the developing countries to boost health system, research and development, pathogenic access and benefit sharing, local production, distribution and timely allocation of all essential medical products to protect all and prevent further spillovers. Some of us in this room are COVID-19 survivors. This was due to access to high-quality medical care, no matter if it were from developing or developed countries. Of course, access to care was undoubtedly worse to the poor, and in their hopelessness were also dreaming to be privileged and prioritized to still alive. Unfortunately, most of them died and are making the biggest stake of more than 60 million lives lost to COVID-19. At the peak of COVID-19 pandemic, some decision makers who are in this room today were enslaved in their homes and others bedridden at hospital, struggling with the uncertainty of life or death. I strongly believe the majority made promise and others even swear to fight for a world of equal value of human beings' life. So that terrifying and unforgettable experience makes everyone in this room a champion for unbiased global health policies and strategies to contribute to timely delivering of equitable WHO pandemic accord, because the world is desperately waiting for us and for it. We look forward to continue constructively engaged alongside our estimate colleagues toward this end. At the peak of COVID-19, I was in charge of the national response in Mozambique, and I got COVID infection twice. And hopefully I'm still alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mozambique. Next is Iran, to be followed by Ecuador.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My delegation would like to thank the IMB Bureau for its work in facilitating the negotiations among member states. We reiterate the importance of member state-led process in which the legitimate concerns of all countries, particularly developing countries, are addressed throughout the text. Having faced enormous challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, developing countries entered the IMB negotiation process in the hope of narrowing the existing chronic gaps with developed countries in the health sector. The Constitution of WHO was written or adopted after 6 months of negotiations, as the DG highlighted, because the member state defined the health of all people as a lofty global priority. The divergent views on the current text show a lack of urgency in preparing for the next pandemic and the broader context of addressing the development concerns of the global south. We believe that a balanced and inclusive definition of the principle of equity necessarily consists of the twin pillars of development and human rights, including the right to development, the right to health, and unhindered access to health-related products and services. In the absence of such essential components in the text, the international community may face a recurring pandemic with familiar features, such as leaving others behind by hoarding vaccines or choosing a discriminatory path to the needs of some countries. Mr. Co-Chair, my delegation shares the concerns expressed by the Group of Equity regarding the text and the process of the negotiations. In addition, we would like to highlight two specific points. First, the text so far has not adequately addressed the issues of unhindered and equitable access to medical and therapeutic products due to inhuman sanctions. Sanctions lead to restrictions and costly and lengthy processes for access to medical products and related transactions. We want to be clear about this. The text should adequately address this aspect in the context of equity and within articles, namely Articles 10, 11, 12, 13, 19, and 20. In this context, we would like to request the Bureau to invite the WHO Secretariat to make a brief presentation to Member States during IMB 8 on the practical challenges of constraints of monetary and non-monetary health transactions, including pandemic-related medical products to some member states. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Ecuador, to be followed by Poland.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. I would like to start by reaffirming Ecuador's commitment to working in a constructive manner to reach an ambitious pandemic agreement, as well as those amendments to the RSI. We appreciate the new version of the text and the progress that has been made until this meeting, reinforcing the complementarity and cohesion between the two instruments. On behalf of Ecuador, we support the statements made by GRULAC, and we support the perspective to strengthen national capacities in the implementation of the pandemic agreement. We appreciate the commitments made in the new version of the text, which sets out in a clearer way the different provisions, and we appreciate the cross-cutting issues that have been made as well. Regarding the amendments to the IHR, we will continue to coordinate the work to promote commitments and capacities to support the member states, comparing the new versions of the text that we're using in the negotiations. Equity should be at the heart of the commitments made by the member states, especially regarding access to health products. It is essential that the agreement promotes solidarity between countries and strengthens health systems at a global level. Ecuador will continue to support the strengthening of capacities for production, prevention, and surveillance, and the just sharing of access and benefits. It is essential that the INB agreement also supports the IHR and other international instruments. We need to have clear commitments for all member states that recognize the differences in national capacities and use issues of convergence and the tools available at our disposal from the WHO, as well as new practices in the region that we have been using in the Americas. Finally, we appreciate the opportunity to take part in these discussions, and we once again reaffirm our commitment to working towards an agreement that strengthens global health and international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Poland, to be followed by South Africa.
Thank you very much. Dear Director General, dear co-chairs, dear colleagues, Poland fully aligned itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. We thank the members of the INB Bureau as well as facilitators of the subgroups for their work and commitment. We clearly see how difficult and demanding their and our task is. And there are still many challenges ahead of us. At the moment, we see that for the next 2 sessions, main challenges ahead of us are to find balance between what we want, what we need, and what is realistic and feasible. Yes, we do have to be ambitious, but also realistic, especially considering the time frame. We also believe that it is necessary to balance the text in terms of prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery, so as to cover the entire pandemic cycle. After all, it's cheaper to prevent disease than to cure them. Finally, we also call for detailed definitions of the parties' obligations without leaving too much room for many interpretations, and not to entrust decisions regarding the parties' key obligation to the future conference of the parties. In the end, when joining the final treaty, member states must be sure exactly what they are joining and what obligations they are agreeing to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is South Africa, to be followed by the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Co-Chair. South Africa aligns to the statement delivered by the distinguished delegates of Ethiopia and Egypt on behalf of the 47 member states of the African region and the 28 member states who are part of the Group of Equity, respectively. South Africa appreciates the progress so far achieved through the leadership by the vice chairs and co-facilitators, and with the support from the Bureau and the Secretariat in an effort to improve, strengthen, and operationalize equity in the negotiating text. We are aware that the process has been challenging, but challenges can be overcome and are welcomed as part of a robust negotiation process. What is important to point out is that the instrument that we are negotiating is trying to correct inequities that have existed over a long time between developing and developed countries. We are therefore not surprised that those amongst us that have benefited over time have found some difficulties in appreciating the concept of equity and have also found it difficult to let go of the benefits or accept proposed changes that are paramount for all developing countries for the realization of equity. We would like, just 1 minute, we would like to remind us of the origin of this process, which was mainly to centralize equity in the new instrument, making it as a way to close the gaps that were obvious during the pandemic. Also, to ensure that the key equity-related articles are operationalized to ensure diversification of production by strengthening the Global South for the attainment of equitable access to health products. It is with this in mind that we are steadfast in our initial commitment to have a legally binding instrument that will have the text that is obligatory on equity-related matters to address the concerns of developing countries. Therefore, we wish to emphasize that Article 12 on access and benefit sharing is central and core to the instrument and tangible equity outcomes. This is supported by research and development, which is in Article 9, sustainable production, Article 10, technology transfer, Article 11, supply chain and logistics, Article 13, implementation support, Article 19, and financing, which is in Article 20, which have been articulated by the Africa region and Group of Equity. We therefore, as South Africa, are ready to cooperate and collaborate and would like to urge the whole intergovernmental negotiating body to use the upcoming 2 weeks efficiently and aim to reach agreed clean text on these equity-related articles so that the negotiations can start immediately. Once again, South Africa reaffirms its full commitment to the negotiation process, including the mandate to adopt a consensus text at the 77th World Health Assembly in May 2024, provided that access and benefit sharing is central to the INB Equity, Action and Results-oriented pandemic treaty, with clear terms of rights and responsibilities of all member states. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Syrian Arab Republic, to be followed by Brazil.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. نتوجه بالشكر إلى الرئيسة.
Thank you very much. We would like to thank the chairs and the WHO Secretariat, as well as the INB. We are convinced that this is an essential exercise for all member states. We would like to thank the Director General for supporting this project that we have been participating in and we will be working on for the next few weeks. We'd also like to thank the facilitators and vice presidents in the negotiations. These are not easy, especially when we have to reach a consensus between all member states. We commend the items that we have been able to move forward on, and as the Director General said, we will have to address some issues where we don't agree, and we'll need to discuss amongst ourselves. The result should be positive for all. It should be a win-win situation. No one should be losing out in the prevention of pandemics. If one country loses, it means we all lose. Syrian Arab Republic supports the statement made by Egypt on behalf of the Equity Group, and we ask that all the issues of concern that we've raised be taken into account during this session and future sessions. We reaffirm what the delegation from Iran said to move towards an unhindered access of health-related products and pandemic-related products. We once again recall that this term should be part of the agreement to take into account the issues of countries, including my own, who suffer from unilateral measures, which has stopped us from being able to respond to COVID-19. We reaffirm the need to have multilateral negotiations to be able to reach positive solutions for all and take into account the needs of all parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Brazil, to be followed by Japan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to all colleagues. Brazil aligns itself to the statements made by AMRO, by the Americas region, and the Group for Equity. And we particularly thank PAHO for facilitating the regional coordinating meeting last week. We should be clear not to lose political momentum to decide on important issues that unfortunately seem to be forgotten, such as equity and solidarity. We are very much committed to achieving meaningful results, but as said by the colleague from the African region, we are close to the deadline but far from agreement. We have to be practical and try to agree on principles and new mechanisms that support public health during interpandemic times and that do not repeat mistakes that happened during pandemic times. The main challenges during COVID-19 or the pandemic, the recent pandemic, were, in our view, the lack of geographically diversified and sustainable local production of medical countermeasures, access to such medical countermeasures, especially vaccines, difficulties and challenges faced by the health workforce and the burden they had to withstand, and the lack of a clear regimen regarding access to pathogens and benefits sharing on an equal footing. Let us not forget the immense difficulties during COVID-19 and the necessity to deal with them. This is why we agreed to convene this negotiating body, and this is why we've been working for the last couple of years. Our responsibility and mandate is to have something meaningful by May. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Next is Japan, to be followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for the floor. Japan appreciates the great efforts made by the Bureau, the Secretariat, and the co-facilitators to hold subgroup meetings and refine the negotiating text, which aims at accelerating the negotiations. At this juncture, we would like to stress 2 points. First, Japan would like to reiterate that this draft agreement should strengthen the prevention, preparedness, and response regarding future pandemics. We need to continue reminding ourselves of this ultimate purpose of the agreement during the negotiations. Anything that undermines or delays activities to benefit pandemic PPR, including research and development, must be avoided. Second, it is also essential to ensure the universality of the membership of this accord. As pandemic affect the entire world, and maximum participation of member states to the agreement is key. Moreover, ensuring dialogue with the relevant stakeholders is essential. In this regard, we highly appreciate that in some subgroups, vice chairs and co-facilitators have worked to hold interactive sessions with the relevant stakeholders. This practice should be adopted in all articles, including for Article 12. In addition, the need to avoid duplication with the ongoing IHR amendments and to enhance complementarity between the two instruments is a common view that we share with stakeholders. We should continue to strengthen cooperation and collaboration with relevant entities in order to ensure effective implementation of this draft agreement. Co-chairs and dear colleagues, Japan remains strongly committed to the discussions in order to carry forward the negotiations through finding a common ground through direct and candid dialogue in the meeting so that we can make it in May. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the United Kingdom, to be followed by the USA.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The UK would like to thank the Bureau and co-facilitators for their hard work and in facilitating the informal sessions since IMB 7. We are seeing progress made through all the invaluable work of these sessions. However, we just have a few months to go, as has been outlined by others. In particular, as just said by Brazil, we need to work together to get a meaningful outcome this May. It is incredibly important that we have a complementary approach between both these discussions in the IMB and those of the international health regulations. We very much welcome the joint session later this week. Many of the issues we are discussing are deeply technical, and a successful implementation will require the involvement of a wider set of stakeholders across the UN, civil society, and the private sector, and we welcome the involvement of those groups today sitting right behind me. We agree with the EU that it's essential that subject matter experts within and outside of WHO have the opportunity to share their expertise and advice with member states, and that more and more timely opportunities are made to engage these key stakeholders so we can get this detail right for this agreement in May. Doing so will improve the feasibility, effectiveness and sustainability of the obligations being proposed. As the UK has stressed before, it's essential the obligations that we agree through this agreement respect national sovereignty. And thank you so much, Director General, for underlining this in your opening comments. So in summary, we look forward to working with you to find rewards that are better able to prevent, as been outlined by the EU, Japan and others, and withstand future pandemic threats, because the rewards are high now and for future generations. We remain committed to working with you, Chair, and everybody here to find consensus in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the USA, to be followed by the Philippines.
Thank you, Co-Chair. The United States aligns with the statement delivered by Mexico on behalf of the Americas region. We would like to thank the Bureau, Secretariat, and especially to the subgroup leaders and co-facilitators who have worked so hard to advance our work since we met last in December. The United States remains fully committed to this process and concluding a successful agreement by the World Health Assembly. This agreement will be a meaningful step forward in advancing global health security for all people. It should be ambitious, but also practical, operationally feasible, and implementable. We appreciate the work by the subgroups and volunteers, and we look forward to discussing progress on the text this week. It is imperative that we reach agreement on significant central issues in these negotiations during this meeting to enable us to stay on track for the May deadline. Concluding these negotiations is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration. It reflects our longstanding commitment to equity and to global public health. No one should doubt that commitment. We acknowledge that there are challenging dynamics at play in the negotiations, and we want to be part of the solution to close gaps. Keeping the short timeline in mind, we are exploring areas of flexibility in our positions, and we expect other member states to do the same. We agree that timely access to life-saving pandemic-related products for least developed countries is absolutely critical. This should be central to our discussions, and there are important components in Article 12 and Article 9 that can significantly advance this goal. We look forward to further discussions this week on the important role governments and industry must play to facilitate a more equitable response during future pandemics. Detecting infectious disease threats quickly and sharing that information widely is critical to limit global transmission and to rapidly develop necessary diagnostics, vaccines, treatments, and other countermeasures to mitigate adverse health effects. We have been consistent throughout these negotiations that we must not hamper pathogen and data sharing by creating new barriers to rapid and widespread sharing. This will slow response and delay the development of pandemic-related products, which will mean more lives lost. We appreciated the Bureau's confidence in the United States to work with countries during the intercessional period, both on Article 14 on regulatory system strengthening and Article 15 on compensation and liability risk management. We also appreciate the work of the Article 19 and 20 subgroup and the progress made on a thoughtful financing framework and an effective coordination mechanism to ensure PPR funding gets to where it's needed most, particularly for least developed countries. The United States is deeply committed to exploring the best ways to align the accord with existing funding entities and efforts, and we look forward to additional progress in the coming weeks. We have continually urged consideration of broader stakeholder views, including from civil society and industry, which will be essential for the future implementation of this agreement. We are frankly disappointed that the Bureau has not taken these calls more seriously. This increases the risk that the rules and structures we create in the accord will fail us when we need them most because they are not practical or implementable. We again call on the Bureau, particularly the Article 12 subgroup, to urgently facilitate these stakeholder discussions before it's too late. As we launch into the penultimate INB session, as the DG just reminded us, we must remember the responsibility before us and all act in good faith to balance our individual core priorities while recognizing that it is not possible to address the entirety of our wish lists by May. Completing the negotiations on time is critical to strengthen future pandemic responses and improve equity, and we must not fail in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is the Philippines, to be followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. The Philippines supports the statement delivered by Egypt on behalf of the Group for Equity. The Philippines, as its national statement, thanks the Bureau co-facilitators and the Secretariat for commitment to facilitate our collective endeavor to reach a consensus on the draft Global Accord for the Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness, and Response. This alone is a highly difficult mission. It entails the cooperation and political will of every member state and all other stakeholders. We all need to consider flexibility and rise above the difference to change the status quo through a transformative, legally binding instrument that protects and gives precedence to the operationalization of equity. For the Philippines, leaving no one behind and equity should remain our moral compass in navigating towards consensus for the global accord. The Philippines will continue to actively engage in INB 8 and 9 with a view to strengthen proposals for articles on health, workforce, and equitable access to technologies and countermeasures, improve the text in consideration of the needs and differentiated capacities of developing countries, and achieve balance so that the negotiation text accurately reflects long formal and informal member state consultations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next is Canada, to be followed by Palestine.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Canada is pleased to be back here with you all for this extended two-week session. We look forward to having 2 productive weeks together, indeed, 2 weeks which it is essential where we make progress. We would like to start by aligning ourselves with the statement delivered by Mexico on behalf of the Americas region. Canada's commitment to moving the bar forward when it comes to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response remains strong. We are equally committed to working collaboratively with all member states to achieve it. Canada strongly supports advancing health equity through this agreement. Along with increasing access to medical countermeasures, the pandemic agreement must also address other dimensions of equity to ensure a comprehensive approach to pandemic PPR. Other dimensions include an equity lens to the prevention of pandemics, and on taking action to advance human rights and dignity, including equity in matters of gender. With the May deadline very close, it is more important than ever that the INB be willing to address all options with regards to how we might achieve our shared goals. Welcoming a diversity of voices to the conversation can only help to ensure that what we eventually land on will be practical, feasible, and implementable. As such, Canada encourages the Bureau to increasingly engage external stakeholders and experts, including those from academia, civil society, and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. Next is Palestine, to be followed by Italy.
شكرا حضرة السيد الرئيس المشارك. طبعا
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The State of Palestine thanks the Secretariat and the Bureau for the new revised document on the agreement, and we thank you for the new proposals that you have presented us with, taking into account all of the different suggestions. We can only commend you and congratulate you on this work. We join other states in thanking you for your work, and we'd also like to remind you that this work should be linked to the work on the amendments to the IHR, which will help us reach a balanced agreement. We believe we should still improve the text regarding the when in negotiations, helping us to reach a final agreement. Indeed, such an agreement is essential for all to improve the response for all countries to pandemics, reaffirming the fundamental right to health for all. Palestine reaffirms that this principle is indispensable and incredibly important, especially during war times and occupation times. And as you know, that is what we are currently suffering from the Israeli attacks on the occupied Palestinian territories. Moreover, it is important to combat pandemics in peacetime as well. We know that developing countries cannot respond as quickly in responding to pandemics. We are not on equal footing. We are not all equipped to face pandemics in peacetime as well as in wartime. We know what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many peoples were left behind. We were not all able to access the same products or have the same capacities. We know that the situation can be very difficult. It can be very hard to see people dying from a lack of oxygen. And we know that viruses know no borders. COVID-19 has reaffirmed this understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, co-chairs, solidarity, transparency, and equity and justice, as well as the participation of all our fundamental principles, particularly at the WHO. We want to reach consensus, taking into account the guiding principles of the member states, especially when talking about equity, technology, financing, and shared but common but differentiated responsibilities. All of these principles are incredibly important, and this is essential to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Italy, to be followed by Germany.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, for giving me the floor. We commend the co-chairs, the vice-chairs, the co-facilitators for their immense efforts and hard work in trying to improve the text. Italy aligns fully with EU's intervention. Italy remains fully committed with the IMB and IHR process. As UK, Brazil, and USA, we must work together to achieve a meaningful agreement by May 2024. We also underline the importance of involving relevant stakeholders in our discussion, as it happened in some subgroups, but needs to be in all subgroups. To engage them in a functioning system, we need to involve them before in the discussions. Thank you, Director General, for your engagement and encouragement, also on mentioning the difficult challenge on disinformation that we are facing back home, that is well organized and so needs a collective and coordinated response, as you underlined. Finally, I would like to thank once again the co-facilitators that are having double burden, not only engaged with their national responsibilities, but also working day and night with the vice chairs in order to achieve and improve the text. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Germany.
Thank you, Chair. And Germany would like to align itself with the EU statement. We would like to thank the Bureau and the co-facilitators for the great progress achieved so far. With many others, we share that our task ahead is to deliver a well-balanced instrument, practicable and implementable with global mandate and clear pragmatic improvements on three key elements: prevention, preparedness and response. In order to achieve this, with many others, we believe it is important to be well informed by external expertise, especially when it comes to the one instrument that has been mentioned by basically all delegations before us, PUPS. We need to have the ones included who are affected and need to play a part in this. We are impressed by the great optimism in the room, shared by basically everyone, that we will reach an ambitious agreement by May. Obviously, we need to open our eyes also with the challenges ahead. At this moment, we have exactly 19.5 negotiating days before us. That's not huge. Given the complex issues at hand, we really need to speed up. We believe that's possible. We believe it is possible to make, if we make the best effective use of our remaining time. We are confident that we will find a consensus on an instrument that certainly will make the world safer, but we need to speed up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Germany. And that concludes my list, at least, I think, for now, from member states that wanted to speak. Oh. But we're checking the room once more to see if we missed some of you.
Yes, I see Thailand.
I see Thailand. Is there anyone else in the back there that we missed? No, just Thailand. Thailand, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Thailand allies ourselves with the statement of Group for Equity delivered by Egypt. Thailand appreciates the work of Bureau, Secretariat, and co-facilitators in developing these challenging outputs for discussion in this session. We would like to remind that the time is not on our side, and we should focus on what kind of draft agreement we want to deliver to the Health Assembly this May. Thailand has 2 comments to highlight as follows. First, to expedite the process, we should aim to have draft negotiation text ready as soon as possible before ANB9, so that the member states with small delegation could discuss among their parties and bring back their views to ANB9 productively. Second, Thailand believes that to prevent, detect, and respond to pandemic, the world needs solidarity. The solidarity in terms of common responsibilities to work together toward the pandemic agreement, which would be initially presented through our work here within INB. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else we missed? No, that doesn't seem to be the case, so that then indeed concludes our deliberations and opening remarks from member states, and we will continue with our NGO colleagues who are in the room or online. And the first one on my list is Gavi, and I remind you that the speaking time is 2 minutes. Gavi, you have the floor, to be followed by the European Society for Medical Oncology. So prepare yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, would like to acknowledge the progress that Member States are making in the negotiations. We are particularly thankful for the opportunity Gavi was given last week to speak to Member States and relevant stakeholders on Articles 19 and 20. We remain open to speak with other subgroups in the coming weeks as appropriate. As we approach the finishing line of the INB process, we must not forget the reasons why Member States decided to start drafting a pandemic agreement. Among other challenges, inequitable access to medical countermeasures, including vaccines, has been a recurrent problem during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in low and middle-income countries. Therefore, ensuring that equity and solidarity are at the heart of the pandemic agreement is of essence. We recommend Member States to, first, explicitly recognize routine immunization as a fundamental intervention for reducing pandemic risks that prevents outbreaks before they become pandemics and strengthens health systems between pandemics, particularly surveillance and supply chains. Second, retain the 20% suggested pandemic-related products allocation for lower-income countries as the bare minimum percentage of benefit sharing to address equity. Third, ensure that any financing mechanism in the pandemic accord addresses both prevention and preparedness investments, as well as surge funds that can be rapidly mobilized for pandemic responses from day zero. And finally, adopt governance structures that are country-driven, lean, agile, and inclusive of civil society, private sector, and communities, with a clearly defined role for specialized agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, European Society for Medical Oncology, to be followed by Public Services International.
Thank you. Honourable co-chairs, esteemed delegates, the European Society for Medical Oncology reiterates that it is crucial that the WHO pandemic agreement specifically includes reference to secondary and tertiary healthcare services to avoid leaving millions of patients with cancer behind during and beyond pandemics, as they are predominantly treated at these levels. The political commitment the rationale, and the technical guidance for implementation are all siding with this. With the 2023 UN Political Declaration on Pandemics, countries committed to take measures to enhance the resilience of national health systems for pandemics and other health emergencies at primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare levels, referring to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The Sendai Framework, adopted by 187 UN member states in 2015, notes that people with life-threatening or chronic disease should have access to life-saving services during and after disasters. And the WHO technical guidance notes on the Sendai Framework highlights that integrating disaster risk management into primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare will reduce the health risks and consequences of emergencies and disasters and enhance health security, universal health coverage, sustainable development, and the resilience of communities and countries. It is thereby logical that the pandemic agreement should reference both secondary and tertiary levels of care in Chapter 6, Paragraph 1, in addition to primary care. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Public Services International, to be followed by Site Savers.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. In the spirit of the briefing last week, we will be having a written statement after we get the current state of the text through the official quarters. But at this juncture, our take is more general, and one is to stress the fact that yes, a lot of work has been put in and we appreciate the shortness of the time, but it is not, the problems need to be squarely looked at. And some of what came out here of the need for having experts advise, and we think that the problem is not so much about input. It is out there, not only from civil society organizations, even from other specialized agencies of the United Nations like the ILO. It's about taking this up. It's about the IMB taking the, for example, the positions from the ILO for inclusion of fundamental principles and rights at work as part of the human rights to be respected is still not in what we gather as the current state of the text. We think things like this need to be integrated in the negotiations. The need for health workers, trade unions, to also be involved in the processes. These are key items that speak to a way forward, even drawing from experiences from COVID-19. And we also think that a major elephant in the room is because negotiations will entail give and take. But one of the delegates spoke to it now, which is that those that have benefited the most from the power balances in the world, they do have a greater responsibility to concede. And the bottom line, and I'll also be summing up, the bottom line is this, that the one thread that should run through the accord, in our view, unambiguously, is putting the people over profit, is putting health over wealth, because the very first treaty of the WHO constitution itself, and which makes health a fundamental human right. So that will be our general comment now as we await the text. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Site Savers, to be followed by Innovart.
Thank you, co-chairs. The right to health is a pivotal aspect of PPPR, and it's inseparable from equity as a central pillar and objective of the instrument. But it hasn't yet been given the attention it deserves in the drafting process. At this point, the language in the draft text relating to human rights is poorly aligned with existing human rights obligations, including the right to health as enshrined in the WHO Constitution. We think that IMB 8 provides a very important opportunity to address this. Specifically, the the language for the general principle of respect for human rights in Article 3 should refer to the full realization of human rights, including the right to the highest attainable standard of health and the obligation to respect, protect and fulfill rights. The definition of persons in vulnerable situations in Article 1 should be expanded to reflect the full scope of the right to health, not limited only to a disproportionate increased risk from disease, but also incorporating risks from other harms that impact on the right to health in pandemic situations. PPPR measures at national level in Articles 6, 16 and 17 should reflect the close interdependence of the right to health with the realisation of associated rights, including the rights to life, food, housing, social security, education, human dignity, non-discrimination and equality. And finally, the instrument should also incorporate language on human rights limitations and derogation standards based on existing guidelines in human rights law. Thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you very much. Next is Innovart, please, to be followed by Born Free Foundation.
Thank you, co-chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Innovarte, a Latin American NGO. Our remarks focus on Chapter 3 and Article 11. Chapter 3 lacks a clear mechanism to inform and report on obstacles to implementation without resorting to a dispute settlement mechanism. We recommend including a monitoring mechanism similar to that contained in Article 71 of the TRIPS Agreement for periodic national reviews. At a minimum, Article 25 should include a reference to the possibility for member parties to notify of obstacles to implementation caused by other parties, and the possibility to request information or report this to the relevant party. Article 30 is unnecessary as conditions for reservation and declaration are expressly covered by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties and the International Law Commission. If such provision is needed, it could be replaced by any declaration should be in good faith and compatible with the objective and purpose of the treaty. With regards to Article 11, we welcome the addition of paragraph 6 as it is critical for the preparation of national legislation. However, it lacks a clarification regarding the need for government use, which was widely and successfully applied by the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic. We recommend clarifying this by referring to the relevant TRIPS provisions on government use, which are Articles 6, 30, 31, 39, paragraph 3, 40, and 44. Finally, paragraph 5 fails to address the complexity and the burdensome implementation of paragraph 6 of the Doha Declaration, which creates a barrier for imports and exports under compulsory licensing. Instead, we urge the parties to incorporate an exemption to Article 31H of TRIPS in the event of a pandemic in order to eliminate the inequity that precludes developing countries with no capacity to produce to benefit from the flexibilities in Article 31. We have other inputs that are available in the chat. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Born Free Foundation to be followed by 4Ors.
Thank you, co-chairs. We very much appreciate the efforts that have been made towards achieving an agreement at the World Health Assembly in May. We have consistently argued for a strong focus on prevention of pathogen spillover at source in the instrument and for an overarching One Health approach in order to ensure efforts to address future pandemic risk are effective, cost-effective and equitable. To this end, we advocate for the incorporation of clear definitions of pandemic prevention and spillover, using as a guide the One Health high-level expert panel's white paper on the prevention of zoonotic spillover, which goes into some detail on the important difference between prevention at source and containment. The language in paragraph 3C on zoonotic spillover prevention in the latest draft of Article 4 is very welcome. Parties should support the adoption of this language and should be encouraged to take regulatory and other measures to reduce zoonotic spillover risks associated with identified high-risk activities as part of their national action plans. Article 5 should promote the development of guidelines, standards and recommendations to support the operationalisation and implementation of a One Health approach and the availability of financial and technical support, assistance and cooperation in line with Articles 18 to 20. Implementing a highly precautionary approach to pandemic prevention and associated One Health strategies would provide robust collaborative solutions to implement prevention strategies in a practical and holistic way and optimize synergies between human, animal and environmental health workforces. It's vital that these activities are adequately resourced. The engagement of and collaboration between national, regional and international implementing agencies, including the members of the quadripartite, should be implicit in the text of the instrument in order to emphasise their importance in supporting member states in the development and implementation of national strategies. Thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you very much. Next is 4PAWS, to be followed by Health Action International.
Thank you very much. Dear ambassadors and delegates to the WHO, in the name of 4PAWS, I want to thank you for your commitment to making this pandemic instrument a reality. We all agree that a key cornerstone of this instrument is equity. 4PAWS believes that true equity can only be achieved if vulnerable communities who come into daily contact with animals and pathogens have the capacities and resources to protect themselves by preventing the spillover of zoonotic diseases. Measures must begin before communities suffer and before health systems are overwhelmed. This can be achieved by improving animal welfare and transitioning away from high-risk practices while securing the livelihoods of communities that come into contact with animals and pathogens. The pandemic instrument must include pandemic prevention measures under a One Health approach and include guidelines that standards to ensure joint consensus on a broad list of measures eligible for funding and technical support. Existing guidance, such as the One Health Joint Plan of Action implementation guide, can be used as a reference. Last but not least, the FAO, the VOHA, the UNEP, and the WHO agencies with expertise on One Health can support member states in the implementation of the provisions of this agreement. We have the tools and expertise to prevent pandemics. We are confident and counting on you to develop a legal instrument that includes these essential puzzle pieces to bring about an effective outcome that protects us and the generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Health Action International, to be followed by the Medicines Law and Policy.
Thank you, Co-Chair. HAI is pleased to be able to share our reaction to the text relating to the pandemic agreement having been made available just recently. We commend the efforts of the IMB Bureau, as well as the co-facilitators of the different subgroups. We will focus our comments on Article 9 and 10. Affordable and sustainable R&D is critical for an effective and equitable response to the next pandemic. We welcome the acknowledgement of the need for enhancing access to innovative health technologies and ensuring that data from clinical trials is properly reported and compiled. We believe, however, that the stronger, meaningful wording is still missing regarding the management of IP rights in times of pandemic and health emergencies. Patents cannot and should not be absolute nor limit the ability of governments to protect and promote public health. Reaching a consensus on a number of issues that have proven to be contentious in the past was always going to be a challenge, and the efforts made to date by most parties to reach workable documents are laudable. However, we feel obliged to express our concern that we are heading towards an outcome that would not meet the expectations, needs, and hopes entrusted in this process. Finally, we must insist once again on the need for greater transparency and accountability of this negotiating process, particularly regarding undue influence of private actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Medicines Law and Policy, to be followed by Oxfam.
Thank you, co-chairs, for the opportunity to be here and to address this very important meeting. I should preface my 2 minutes by saying that my comments are based on draft texts that were referenced in the media, and we're very pleased that from now on text will be shared with relevant stakeholders. Thank you very much for that decision. Looking back at previous drafts of your work, we see a steady decline in the forcefulness of many of the provisions. Few hard commitments to action remain. Provisions are increasingly vague, ambiguous, or left to voluntary actions. Difficult topics are avoided or have been removed altogether. An example of the latter is a key intellectual property problem that relates to the sharing of vital know-how and trade secrets, the absence of which could block worldwide production of vaccines and other pandemic countermeasures. We have proposed a mechanism to solve this, which is possible within the context of the WTO TRIPS agreement, and yet as we look through the developing text, we see mostly watered-down attempts or no attempts at all. The new instrument, and we would like to stress this, needs to solve some hard problems to ensure access to vital IP, know-how, information and products to prevent or combat future pandemics. And that means creating new obligations for WHO member states, not just reiterating the status quo. We have a few preliminary comments but focused on Article 11 and some IP issues. Article 11, paragraph 5, mentions the role of the TRIPS flexibilities, but focuses very much on compulsory licensing, which is important, in particular in situations where voluntary and mutually agreed solutions do not emerge. But it would be important to recognize that there are other relevant provisions for access to be found in the TRIPS agreement. Innovarte made a similar comment. It would also be important that parties agree not to challenge or exert pressure on countries that want to adopt and use these flexibilities. And last, Article 11 should also explicitly mention the need to create and support IP pooling, including the medicines patent pool. The draft text that we've seen mentions the pandemic technology access pool, but only in Chapter 3. And IP licensing, including pooling, should be a central part of Article 11. We're ready to continue to work with delegations. Now texts have been shared, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next is Oxfam, to be followed by the South Centre.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for enabling us to see texts. I'm speaking on behalf of Oxfam and the People's Vaccine Alliance. As the Accord enters its final stages, we urge countries to turn good intentions to reality, equity, solidarity, and common good. For 4 years, we've been watching Europe, the US, and others implementing and proposing measures to ensure technology development and transfer and to remove IP barriers in order to enable innovation and access for their population. Yet, they object to including the same measures here in the Accord. We must say no to double standards, and we must insist on using the same standards worldwide. The Accord must adopt practical measures for technology transfer, removing IP barrier, enhancing local production, and a proper benefit sharing attached to access to pathogens and data. As the colleague from Egypt said on behalf of the Equity Group, measures to put lives before profit. Remember, the viruses have two important characters. One, they do not respect borders, as was said, and also they mutate. The Accord must include practical measures to provide protection for all humans, irrespective of where they live, and including those in conflict situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the South Centre, to be followed by Frontline AIDS.
Good morning to you all. The South Centre is an intergovernmental organization of developing countries. We thank the co-chairs for the summary of the work of the INB. We recognize the hard work done so far, and we wish all delegations success in the deliberations this week. We also thank members for agreeing to allow the text of all articles to be shared. This will facilitate our analysis of the refined textual proposals by the drafting subgroups and consideration of the state of progress made so far. We would like to learn more about how experts are engaged in discussions by the subgroups. We recommend inclusion of expertise from developing countries, and we extend the offer to provide input. The expectation is that the instrument will increase multilateral cooperation, equity, and accountability by setting new rules, addressing key problems that hinder an effective collective response to pandemics. Therefore, a pragmatic approach towards reaching consensus should remain focused on key objectives. The instrument should serve to support countries to build stronger capabilities to prevent and deal with health emergencies and pandemics, building on the IHR and with a One Health framework. Deliver closer coordination and cooperation among parties, restrain profiteering and increase transparency in contracts with private parties for production and purchase of medical countermeasures, set building blocks for a more collaborative global research and development ecosystem that delivers innovation for the benefit of all, with sharing of information on research leads, clinical trials, facilitated access to technology and know-how, regional production capacities, and the fair distribution of life-saving medical countermeasures during pandemics. And finally, to expand financing. Thank you, and we remain available.
And thank you very much. Next is Frontline AIDS, to be followed by DNDi.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you to the INB for the opportunity to speak and for civil society to participate again in person. I am speaking on behalf of Frontline AIDS and on behalf of the wider civil society coalition of advocates for global health and pandemic preparedness that we are a member of. And this morning I'd like to briefly speak on 3 key points. So firstly, for the subgroup who will be negotiating this week on Article 6, Preparedness, Readiness and Resilience, we would urge Member States to include text on leveraging best practices and lessons learned in the HIV response for pandemic preparedness, reference to which had been included in earlier drafts, and also to include commitments on accelerating efforts to end the global epidemics of HIV, TB and malaria. Secondly, we are encouraged that language on the role of community responses has seemingly been strengthened throughout the most recent version of the text. For the drafting group who will be working this week on Article 17, whole of government and whole of society approaches at the national level, it is important to highlight in this article not only about community engagement, but specifically the active role of community leadership in PPPR efforts. And lastly, for the subgroup on Article 12, access and benefit sharing, where potential language around a PAB system is still being considered, we would urge countries as a minimum to ensure that alongside obligations on sharing information during pandemics, there is also strong and binding language on obligations for sharing the benefits and technologies that are developed from this information. This will be essential for an equitable response to pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is DNDi, to be followed by the IFPMA.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We share concerns that major divides in substantive issues risk the prospect of making meaningful change. However, we do see some real opportunities to take forward proposals that can help bridge those divides by demonstrating concrete commitment to operationalise equity. One such bridge is in relation to conditions on public funding for research and development. The new proposed text for Article 9 has reinstated a provision to attach conditions to public funding. This provides a basis for further negotiation and reflects the support from many Member States. The next step for Member States is to focus on what those conditions should be. The new provisions provide a general obligation to include conditions. However, it does not contain sufficient high-level detail about their type or scope. While the specific way in which this provision will be implemented will depend on the stage of research being funded and guided by domestic implementation of the Accord, there are key elements which should be included now to align expectations on baseline conditions and backstop powers if those conditions are not adhered to. Without agreement on the nature of the conditions needed, there will not be coherence between funders and R&D stages, leaving gaps and limitations in the actions needed. As member states look for areas of consensus, agreeing to attach conditions to their own funding is an area which is within their ability to do so. It is concrete, impactful, and provides one opportunity for countries to focus on setting the rules for all involved to accelerate the research, development, and equitable access to new health tools that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is IFPMA to be followed by the Third World Network.
Thank you, Chair. Concluding the negotiations on a new agreement must continue to center around two key objectives. The first is ensuring equity of access to medical countermeasures in future pandemics. The second is ensuring that science and innovation can deliver at the rapid pace and scale needed. We remain deeply concerned that current proposals will not address the issue of inequity of access and will stifle the innovation ecosystem that delivered against COVID-19. Delinking access to pathogens from benefit-sharing obligations is the most effective way to support innovation and equitable access. Our industry has made a clear commitment to reserve an allocation of real-time production of vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics for priority populations in lower-income countries in future pandemics, as well as taking measures to make them available and affordable. The latest negotiating text on a PABS system includes stringent requirements for sharing or accessing pathogen data that could severely hinder responses to future pandemics and basic R&D and will not improve equitable access to medical countermeasures. This approach must be replaced by one which enshrines a decentralized pathogen sharing system based on existing databases, a legally enforceable obligation for all countries to promptly share pathogen samples and sequence data, and a legally binding presumption of consent for accessing pathogens. An effective pandemic agreement will require the contribution of all stakeholders acting in cooperation. Industry is keen to provide evidence and experience to negotiators, and we are eager to make a positive contribution to a practical agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Third World Network to be followed by Pandemic Action Network.
Thank you, co-chairs. We stress upon the following points. First, the draft negotiating text is still phrased using best endeavor language without creating any accountable coordination mechanism at the international level to deliver equity through diversification of production and distribution of health products. This will not translate promise of equity into reality. Second, a fully linked PAPS system covering PHEIC and pandemic potential pathogens and their GST, including benefits arising from their use on equal footing, is critical to mutual trust and cooperation. We take note with great disappointment that there is an attempt to push a complicated view of sharing genetic sequence data through the currently existing databases. This clearly perpetuates an inequitable extraction of genetic information from developing countries to developed countries, inconsistent with the UNESCO recommendation for open science and other ABS regulations. Third, we call upon member states to address pandemic prevention genuinely and not simply by building globally integrated surveillance structures, which will lead only to inequitable data extraction, unnecessary panic cycles, disrupting people's lives and livelihood. This will reinforce colonial trends in health emergency regime in the name of pandemic prevention. Member states must recognize common but differentiated responsibility as a critical element in the instrument, and in particular in Articles 4 and 5. 4, we call upon member states to establish a well-funded, well-governed financial mechanism that will sustain and update the global health emergency architecture, including diversified production facilities, without subjecting to conditionalities and terms fixed by entities external to WHO and not accountable to its member states. Finally, we would like to remind the floor once again that IHR 2005 is an existing instrument that binds all member states of WHO and applicable to a broader set of health emergencies that are not necessarily pandemic potential. Therefore, equity must be addressed in both instruments. Thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you. Next is the Pandemic Action Network, to be followed by UNAIDS.
I'm speaking on behalf of Pandemic Action Network, a global network civil society organization bringing together partners committed to collective action to prevent the next pandemic. Today, our main message is to all parties to the agreement, all leaders, and concerns this last crucial phase of the negotiations. Starting today, we urge you to bring the full breadth of civil society in the negotiations until the process is concluded and beyond. This is once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and without the feedback from the community groups, healthcare workers, and groups from across civil society, solutions will be incomplete, and we will not achieve the level of ambition needed to go beyond business as usual. This week, negotiators and their teams have the opportunity to hear from civil society. On Wednesday and Thursday, at 12:45 to 13:45 each day, we invite negotiators to join us online and in Seoul 10 to listen to civil society groups give their inputs to this crucial process. If you are a civil society group, we urge you to come along. We want these consultations to be just the beginning. This is late in the process, but let's open the doors to this engagement and keep it open for civil society to participate and inform this process. On the content of the agreement, the priorities that we and almost 100 of our partners are pushing for ambitious outcomes on include equitable access. We want to see a structural change that addresses the sharing of know-how and technology, not a solution based on charity and structural inequalities. On accountability and institutional arrangement, we want to see a COP-like process for pandemics, as we have for climate change, to elevate this issue and to level it to the level it needs and deserves. We're also following gender, One Health, and the debate around financing. On the latter, we want member states to fulfill promise on the pandemic fund and existing arrangements. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday and Thursday for CSO consultations.
Thank you very much. Next is UNAIDS, to be followed by Knowledge Ecology International.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. UNAIDS would like to acknowledge the progress made so far, and we also hope that a meaningful agreement will be reached by May this year. Important lessons from the HIV response that can strengthen broader pandemic prevention, preparedness response include, and I'm going to focus on 5 points. Number 1, human rights must be at the center of all actions to prevent and respond to HIV and other pandemics. The political declaration on HIV and AIDS notes the need to respect, promote, protect, and fulfill all human rights, which are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And it's particularly important for the most vulnerable people. The infrastructure built up and strengthened to respond to the HIV pandemic, from lab systems, surveillance and health information systems, procurement, supply chain management through to community infrastructure and government approaches, is vital for addressing other pandemics, and it should be preserved. As expressed by the ACTI group intervention, enabling equitable and timely access to scientific solutions, pandemic-related health products to all those in need is critical for saving lives and ending a pandemic. Clear responsibilities of pathogen access and benefit sharing systems and deploying effective mechanisms for sharing of technology and know-how and rights for generating local capacities in addressing pandemics are key. The current global AIDS strategy, by using an equality lens, offers the strategies to operationalize the principle of equity. Closing social and economic gaps within and between countries will help to avoid millions of preventable deaths. Therefore, sustainable financing is a key aspect for an implementable agreement. Pandemic prevention, preparedness and response cannot succeed without mobilizing and enabling communities to lead themselves. Investing in community-led mechanisms is critical for successful prevention and response to pandemics. They should be an essential part of the decision and implementation mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Knowledge Ecology International, to be followed by Wildlife Conservation Society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Among the areas of division are those relating to intellectual property rights. We are pleased to see in Article 11, paragraph 6, an obligation for a country to review and update as necessary its national legislation for flexibilities in intellectual property laws that are relevant to dealing with a pandemic. It would be helpful to add reporting on what members think is necessary, and also if they've implemented the exceptions in their laws and if the exceptions are actually used. It's one thing to have an exception in national law that is never used, and another to actually use the exceptions. We know that during COVID, the United States did not use Article 31 bis or Article 31 of the TRIPS agreement, but rather some combination of TRIPS Article 30 and Article 44 to provide authorization and consent for non-voluntary use of patent inventions, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. The pandemic agreement should include an obligation to use exceptions, including those cited by Innovarte in their excellent intervention, when necessary to achieve the objectives of the treaty, particularly for flexibilities like compulsory licensing when they require decisions by governments or courts. The parties should also consider an opt-in pool for sharing rights obtained in government R&D and procurement contracts, a topic addressed by D&DI. The opt-in, we think you should look at possibly an opt-in pool that can be designed to only share on a reciprocal basis with parties that join the pool, and that the specific obligations to benefit from such a technology pool could be determined later in the implementation of the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Wildlife Conservation Society, to be followed by the Action for Animal Health Coalition.
WCS would like to thank the IMB for your tireless efforts to ensure that a meaningful pandemic agreement that covers the full spectrum of prevention, preparedness, and response is adopted this year. In particular, we would like to acknowledge Ambassador Hanse, India, the UK, and Tanzania for actively engaging with member states and developing a proposal for Articles 4 through 6 that includes zoonotic spillover prevention and enhanced collaborative and integrated surveillance in line with the One Health approach. We encourage member states to support the inclusion of these highly relevant and important concepts in the operative paragraphs of the pandemic agreement. As the directing and coordinating authority on international health work, the WHO and its parties must ensure that this once-in-a-generation agreement includes provisions that will truly reduce the risk of pathogen spillovers, epidemics, pandemics, and the emergence and reemergence of diseases at the human-animal environment interfaces from happening in the first place. As the only international conservation organization with an embedded health program and country and regional offices in approximately 60 countries, primarily in the Global South, WCS is an active and respected partner and resource in the places we work, as well as regionally and internationally. We have been engaged in the IMB process since it launched and remain ready to support you with our scientific, technical, and policy expertise as you approach the final months of negotiations. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to address the plenary. We wish you a fruitful meeting.
Thank you very much. Next is Wildlife Conservation Society. Oh, sorry, we forgot to stripe it. Next is Action for Animal Health Coalition, to be followed by the International Labour Organization.
Thank you very much for the floor. Action for Animal Health congratulates the Bureau and Member States on all the progress made so far. We urge Member States to keep both prevention and a One Health approach in the agreement in a meaningful way. Spillover of pathogens from both wild and domestic animals to people is the predominant cause of emerging infectious diseases. The importance of prevention of spillover cannot be overstated. For example, the longer the current highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak circulates in wild and domestic birds, the more likely virus mutations or reassortment will lead to potential human-to-human transmission. The need to prevent, detect and respond to zoonotic disease outbreaks in animals in their earliest stage is paramount for maximum impact. To do this effectively, we need to fill capacity gaps in the animal health workforce so that outbreaks are reported and responded to quickly. A One Health approach to the prevention of spillover costs just 1/3 of the cost of managing a pandemic, according to the World Bank. One Health is also an opportunity to pool resources between sectors for pandemic preparedness and response, such as sharing lab capacity, human resources, cold chains, and existing vaccine production technologies. In addition to preventing pandemics, investing in animal health systems will have knock-on benefits for food security, nutrition, climate resilience, and income security for communities that depend on livestock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the International Labour Organization, and they are followed by Spark Street Advisors.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We thank all governments, the Bureau, and the Secretariat for your efforts in advancing the negotiations and engaging with UN relevant agencies. The ILO welcomes the collaborative methodology of this process. However, we remain seriously concerned that the text under consideration does not reflect some of the most critical lessons related to the contributions and challenges faced by workers during the pandemic and by the employers. The COVID crisis reminded us all of the importance of key workers, how economies and societies could bring into a halt if these workers did not come to work, or if the enterprises and organizations they worked for were to shut down. After consultations with Director General Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Umbo, sent a letter to all ILO member states, urging them not to miss the opportunity of building on all the lessons we collectively learned during the pandemic. From a world of work perspective, this calls for the inclusion in the instrument of adequate recognition of the indispensable contribution of all the workers who provide essential services to societies during the pandemic. These are not limited to healthcare workers, even if their role is fundamental, and we have a responsibility to adequately protect them all. We are encouraged by the positive feedback received in this regard from some member states during recent consultations held at the ILO. Ladies and gentlemen, while Article 7 acknowledges the contribution of the health and care workforce, we believe the text must also recognize the broader rights of all essential workers to a safe and healthy work environment, social protection, decent working conditions, and meaningful engagement in decision-making process. Similarly, we recognize the concerns highlighted by some member states on the need to reinforce the language in Article 13 and include adequate measures ensuring the protection of workers who are essential for the normal functioning of supply chains, such as seafarers and other cross-border transport workers. We must not forget that more than 80% of the world trade is moved by sea and that supply chains cannot work without seafarers. The ILO remains committed to promoting decent work, social justice, and effective labor governance in pandemic. We call on all member states to consider the observations shared by the ILO Director General in his letter dated 10 January 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Spark Street Advisors, to be followed by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Great, thank you very much. And we thank the Bureau for sharing the documents with relevant stakeholders this morning and allowing us to provide interventions as well. Our main messaging is around Chapter 3. Evidence on compliance from other treaties is unequivocal. It must be regular, not periodic, and independent monitoring is key. Reading Chapter 3 is a bit like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle without seeing the photo on the box. I note a few among many problematic areas. There are lots of new interconnected and complex groups with unclear dependencies, a scientific advisory committee appointed by the DG, an implementation and compliance committee, also appointed by the DG, and a third committee, presumably a Committee C, which is entirely new to WHO. Key elements from previous drafts, like peer review, are remarkably missing. The proposal for compliance relies on state self-reporting, which is periodic, not even regular, and the only documentation available for official review is by sources to information from or through or by agreement of the WHO. None of these proposals are evidence-based. We ask the Bureau and the member states that comprise it to ensure that there is ample time of that 19.5 days spent on Chapter 3. This chapter on governance and compliance, even though it comes at the end of the document, cannot be an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, to be followed by the World Intellectual Property Organization.
Good morning, and thank you, Co-Chair. I'd like to just take a brief step back to the origins of this process. What was this agreement about? One of the reasons that was given was that we needed a pandemics treaty to prevent the catastrophic consequences that accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic. And these included marginalized populations and groups being left behind, the gendered impact of the pandemic, a multilateral system not functioning optimally as envisaged in the UN Charter. Human rights were a factor across all these issues. And from the HIV experience, for example, we know that public health measures which do not take human rights seriously into account will leave marginalized populations behind, will fail to address structural barriers to access to good quality healthcare, and will miss essential interventions altogether. So is the Pandemics Accord the right place to address these issues? And our response is in the affirmative. PPPR involves implementing the right to health, which is access to services plus the determinants of health. It also involves preventing, preparing for, and responding to the socioeconomic impacts of pandemics. If this were a treaty on HIV, it would be a major omission not to be very, very intentional about the rights of key populations, discrimination, gender equality, etc. And the pandemics treaty requires an equally holistic approach focusing on the human rights dimension specific to pandemics. If the right to health and human rights are meant to guide the implementation of this agreement, it will be important to see this in the text substantively and systematically, and currently this is not the case. OHCHR acknowledges that member states have recognized the capacity and resources available in your stakeholders, and while we very much appreciate being relevant, we continue to press our case for a more meaningful involvement. As such, I refer to the offer we, as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, have made and which still stands to support you as a part of a standing capacity within the drafting process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the World Organization for Animal Health, to be followed by the World Intellectual Property Organization.
Thank you very much. We commend the progress made so far in the pandemic agreement, including towards concrete articles on prevention, One Health, and preparedness, readiness, and resilience. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to meet with the subgroups working on Article 4, 5, and 6, and to provide expertise in this regard related to our mandate as the intergovernmental organization working to ensure animal health and welfare worldwide, including wildlife health. Going forward, we recommend that the One Health be included in Article 3 as a general principle, as was the case in the Bureau draft in June 2023. Recognizing the One Health as a general approach would facilitate mainstreaming a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary integrated approach across other relevant provisions of this agreement. This would be important, among others, for articles on prevention, on healthcare workforce, on international collaboration and cooperation, and Article 19 on the implementation capacities and support. We also recommend to ensure recognition of the role of the quadripartite collaboration on One Health to support countries to deliver on these commitments. It's only through solidarity and collaboration of all relevant stakeholders and through equity that we overcome the complex challenges before us and we build a safer, more resilient future for all. We share the optimism and aspiration of many in the room today, and we wish to see the adoption of the agreement at the World Health Assembly in May 2024, and we reiterate our commitment to contribute to this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is the World Intellectual Property Organization, to be followed by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
Good afternoon, co-chairs, excellencies, and distinguished delegates. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to address the 8th session of the INB. While we have just received the latest negotiation text, as the UN agency responsible for IP and innovation, we continue to have these important points to make. We consider it important to respect the competencies of other organizations and treaty bodies. WIPO continues to support recognition that any outcome from the INB process shall not affect the rights and obligations and the other existing international agreements. While recognizing the importance of access, WIPO continues to consider IP enabler and support language, recognizing that the protection of IP rights is important for the development of new medical products. WIPO is ready to offer our technical expertise to support member states in this process. We look forward to reviewing the text in more detail and further opportunities to provide comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, to be followed by Médecins Sans Frontières.
The Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security is an independent academic institution that works to protect people's health from epidemics and disasters and build resilient societies. Member states, we all have a common mutual interest in a safer, more equitable world. This agreement is of extraordinary importance, and we urge all states to do what they can to use this momentum and energy to come to an agreement by the time of the World Health Assembly. We welcome the sharing of progressed articles with relevant stakeholders and look forward to reviewing the proposed designs for PABs. Inclusion of PABs in the pandemic agreement is the chance to enshrine a legal obligation to share samples and sequence data rapidly and comprehensively, but for justice and for global health security, such obligations must be on equal footing with the equitable sharing of benefits arising from their use. The current governance regime for samples without a specialised international instrument is bilateral and transactional, untenable for both equity and science. PABs is the answer. A multilateral system that for countries both embeds and decouples access from benefits, enshrines mutual obligations that rebuild trust in international law and the international system, and realises the right to health. For recipients, the use of standard material transfer agreements to guarantee a minimum of 20% real-time production of pandemic-related products transforms equity from rhetoric to action. And a reasonable system for recipient contribution would assist funding global capacities for pandemic prevention, preparedness and response in the only true transaction within PABs, science for science. To that end, we have a forthcoming open letter, co-signed by more than 270 scientists around the world, calling on member states to include PABs in the pandemic agreement, ensuring science for science, as well as a mechanism that substantively realises equity and human rights. Thank you, and we wish you a successful 2 weeks ahead.
And thank you very much. Next is Médecins Sans Frontières.
Thank you, Chair. MSF urges the member states to agree on a comprehensive package in the pandemic agreement of commitment that prioritizes the needs of people in humanitarian and resource-limited settings, ensuring the protection of medical facilities, personnel, and patients remain an absolute prerequisite for any medical intervention. The unique challenges faced by people affected by armed conflict, natural disasters, and other humanitarian crises must be recognized and addressed throughout the Accord, including by explicitly including them as part of the definition of vulnerable populations. Clear rules are also needed to ensure supply for the international stockpiling of medical products and in order to prevent national stockpiling efforts from competing against global access needs. Humanitarian and public health needs should be put at the center of priority setting and decision-making for stockpiling and allocation. Governments should agree on rules linking public funding of medical products to conditions to ensure access to those products, and on rules incorporating international medical ethics guidelines to ensure post-clinical trial access. On intellectual property rights, the agreement should explicitly specify government's responsibility to incorporate and use all possible legal flexibilities for the broadest possible access to medical products. Attempts to introduce more stringent intellectual property rights in trade negotiations must be revoked. Whether a draft text recognizes transparency as a key principle, it should go further and introduce obligations for government to increase access to information and prohibit the use of confidentiality clauses, especially in procurement agreements when access to medical products is at stake. The agreement should have an international access benefit sharing mechanism. This should include a dedicated portion of global production and supply to global stockpiling and equitable allocation mechanism, and transfer of technology and know-how to manufacturers, particularly in resource-limited countries and regions. We welcome the publication of the new INB draft text and will continue sharing our comment accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of my list of of non-governmental organizations, and we check if we missed anybody, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Then we will finish this morning's session with a contribution from our colleagues from Nigeria who are online. Nigeria, please.
Thank you, co-chairs. Nigeria aligns with Ethiopia on the statement delivered on behalf of the 47 member states of the African region and Egypt. Experience, they say, is the best teacher. COVID-19 experience has taught us that the global community is one. No person or country is safe in a pandemic, regardless of economic, military, social, or development status, until everyone is safe. Pandemics deal with humans as one people. Global community must also adopt same approach to deal with issues of pandemic as one people. There is nothing better to protect during pandemics except the right to health and safety of all. Nothing counts during pandemics, not profits, not economy, not political alignment or ideology, not country of origin or geographical location. We have to therefore look beyond these things in our work in the Pandemic Treaty and IHR Amendment. The idea around equity must be concretely operationalized with clear departure from status quo. This must be the goal. If not, it can be assured that any future pandemic will be more challenging. Let us not be quick to forget the toll that COVID-19 took on us all, a situation that brought the global community to its knees and took millions of lives with it. We cannot allow this happen again under our watch. It is important that all member states and regions make compromises as we move forward. It is a rare opportunity for everyone taking part in this process, and we must not disappoint the trust of our populations to deliver a veritable instrument that would secure health for all against pandemics, both now and in the future. We saw during the COVID-19 that countries spared nothing in their arsenal in combating the scourge. Wisdom demands that all countries in same manner mobilize these measures and resources, including in research and development, diversified manufacturing of pandemic-related and health products, global supply chain and logistics, technology transfer and know-how, sustainable and predictable financing, enhancement of capacities for surveillance, health and care workforce, and in achieving an equitable balance in PABS system, amongst others. We look forward to engaging productively and objectively during the INB 8 and INB 9. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nigeria. And we're scanning the room, but it seems like that brought us to the end of our general debate for this morning, and we're perfectly in time. Well, actually, we're 2 minutes late, but let's forgive that ourselves. So that means that we will break for lunch, and when we come back, we reconvene in the drafting mode of our meeting, which means that only member states and who else? Member states and regional economic and integration organizations and Palestine and the Holy See are welcome in that session. And we continue then discussing, like you can read in the schedule which we shared, with a dive into the articles 7, 8, 16, 17, and 18. And those were what we call the orphan articles on which the Bureau itself worked in trying to improve it. And we will explain what we did with the articles and hear how you feel about them. So have a good lunch and see you soon after lunch.